Welcome to the Jedha Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my complete series review for Star Wars Andor. I'm sad that we only got 2 seasons. I'm sad that it's over. But man, Star Wars Andor has been some of the best Star Wars that has ever been made. It hits all the itches. It does such a good job on expanding the themes in new, interesting ways. But let's talk about each piece, each episode, each arc piecemeal, and then we're going to talk about them as a collective. So stay tuned. Now, some of this footage was made back when Season 1 was still airing, so I did my best to try to, make everything sound somewhat coherent and sound somewhat like it was recorded at the same time, but there's going to be some differences despite my best efforts. But without further ado, let's just jump right on into Season 1, Episode 1. So this is my Season 1 review of Star Wars Andor, and I have to say, it was phenomenal. Andor was a character-driven story, and the title, I think, doesn't refer to just Andor. It refers to Marva and even Clem as well. This is something I didn't discuss in my review of the season finale, but Andor Cassian, he goes to visit the stone of his father, his adopted father, Clem. He goes there right before he goes to rescue Bix and all that. That is the first thing he does when he returns to Ferrix. Basically visits his father's grave. And I think that's such an emotional scene. Clem, he was only in there for a few episodes, but the actor really helped carry those scenes. Despite how little we got of him, you can tell how much of an impact he had on Cassian. His death by hanging with the clone troopers was the first, showed one of the earliest sparks of rebellion in Cassian, and I unfortunately did get him in trouble. But you can tell he's back, and this time with his adopted mother's death, Marvel's death, he steps up and actually does something. And it's not just him doing it this time. He's not doing it by himself. It's all of Ferrix. And then the young man, old boy, I forget his name, but his father, same thing happened to him as happened with Clem. But he is also standing up against the Empire doing this, but he's not alone, unlike Cassian was. And those things make all the difference. But that's kind of my introductory thoughts there. Kind of a little bit I wanted to tack on about the final episode. But it really does show what the story was building up to. Cassian becoming a rebel. And not just him, and everyone else really on Ferrix and in the galaxy. It's showing how a rebel is born. And those side characters are there to help showcase Cassian and what he's doing, sometimes as a microcosm, sometimes a parallel, a foil, all that. So that's what this series has been showing. Cassian Andor becoming a rebel. Not just somebody who occasionally will fight the Empire because they're inconveniencing him, but somebody who will go out and seek the fight to the Empire, to stand up against tyranny and fascism. The person who will do the right thing and to stand up against evil, even if it inconveniences him. Not because it inconvenienced him, but now he's inconveniencing himself because the Empire needs to be stood up against you. So that's my introductory thoughts. So let us now jump through and watch my review of every single episode. So enjoy it. Hey there, it's JohnBerry555, and welcome to my review of the 3-episode premiere of Star Wars Andor. So yeah, I had considered breaking these 3 reviews up, or these 3 episodes into 3 separate reviews, but I decided against it because all these episodes, despite being 3 individual episodes, all tell one complete story. In many ways, this is an elongated first part of the hero's journey, the call to action, or the call to adventure. That's essentially what's going on here. And it's kind of paralleled in a sense, because we do have flashback scenes, and these are all spoilers. But basically, we're seeing 2 parallel journeys for Cassie in this. Him as a child, that puts him into that eventually will get him into the situation of these 3 episodes. And then we will see essentially his call to action to fight against the Empire more than just occasionally steal something from them, but actually fight against them. That is what we're seeing here. It's very much the introduction to who Cassian Andor is at this point in his life. And then we'll see him grow grow to become the person that we will see in Rogue One. That, I think, is the main story we're going to see. We're going to see Cassian develop into the person we know he will become. We just gotta see that grow. And that's, I think, what's the heart of these stories are going to be. But also, we're getting a sense, too, of what life really like is under the Empire. Because the main events are set only about 5 years before the Battle of Yavin. So that tells us we're pretty close to the time. So that literally means the Rebel Alliance is starting to get formed. Over on the Star, the Phoenix so is doing their stuff. The Ghost School, they're not Phoenix, so they're not, the Ghost School hasn't met up, but they're doing their stuff. Like, all that stuff is happening almost simultaneously. This is maybe about a year or two before that in the timeline, but we're seeing, contacts being made. Cassian, through one of his friends, Bix, gets in contact with a person who recruits Cassian, and we know from the trailer that he will also be working with Mon Mothma, and so we're going to see eventually the Rebel Alliance start to form a bit more, probably paralleling the stuff in Rebels. I would love to get some callouts to Star Wars Rebels too, like you mentioned that. Did you hear that a bunch of rebels over in the Star System took down a Star Destroyer? Talking Zone to Star Destroyer. I love to hear things like that being mentioned. Only because I think that would be a very unique way of building the world and showing that this stuff is happening concurrently with other events that we have seen on screen already, even if it is animated. And Star Wars Rebels, good show, by the way. You can check out my reviews. I have a whole playlist of them. But getting back to talking about Andor, is very much he is making decisions, but they're all generally in reaction to something. He has to respond in order to stay alive. Essentially, that's what all his actions are: staying alive. He's not making a choice he's not yet making choices yet that will put him in certain positions that will make his choices. Cassian is not yet at the point where he's forwarding the plot of his own show. He's not there yet. It's everyone around him that is forwarding the plot, from the corporate police, basically, or more glorified security. But they're forwarding the plot. Bix a little bit, but also Bix's boyfriend, who's jealous of Andor, he forwards the plot. Cassian's adopted mother forwards the plot. Everything that we see here, Cassian is not forwarding the plot on his own accord yet. It's all the people around him. He may be contributing to the plot. We're definitely seeing that a little more near the end. But very much, he is not forwarding his own plot yet, which makes sense. That's where he's going to end up, I'm sure. Because he forwards his own plot a lot more in Rogue One, that final thing in his character journey. We're not there yet, I think, in these 3 episodes of Andor, but I think we're going to see that stuff develop. We're going to see more Cassian making choices that forwards his own plot. And that, I think, is what the story for Andor, for Cassian himself, that's what his character story will be. Now, we're also going to be, I'm assuming, seeing the greater development of the Rebel Alliance story, so the more, lack of a better term, geopolitical plot. But also, I have a feeling we're going to come back to Ferrix. Why? Because we see the corporate police basically are like, they're out for blood now. They've been humiliated. So all those who showed up, they're going to want to, they're going to want to probably convince the superiors to do more on Ferrix to maintain law and order. And we're going to see, and I think we're seeing the residents of Ferrix, they'll also get even more skeptical of the corporate police. Who, by the way, act very much like police. Let's be real. They're not actually police, they glorified security, but they're given some policing powers. And they're just bullies. You give them an inch of power and they take a yard. They very much fit the mold of a bully. And in some small towns I know in the United States, the police are the former high school bullies. They want power. That's probably not always going to be the case. But the sad thing is, this is someone commenting on the state of policing in the United States, where, not necessarily, sometimes the police are more, they police them for the benefit of the rich and powerful, for the corporations, not necessarily for the average person. But that's more failures in policy, not intentional like it is with these corporate security police forces, wherever. But the thing is, in the United States, is many cases the police are there not to serve and protect, but because they want power, and that's a tragedy. And hopefully, we can reform the police so that's not an issue. But going back to Star Wars, I have a feeling we're going to see more conflict develop in the background on Ferrix, and we're going to see it somehow draw Cassian back. And probably also involving the Empire. Probably, start of a rebel story even. It's very possible. I think that's going to help contribute to the story. Because after all, it wouldn't make sense for from a storytelling perspective to show a rebel story that Cassian is familiar with to be on a planet he's never even heard of or never been to. It makes more sense for it to develop from people he knows. And then that way, when the Rebel Alliance needs to contact them, they can send Andor, Cassian, because he knows. And that's, I hope, the way the story goes and seeing the development of the Rebel Alliance. But overall, this is actually a very good series premiere. After I finished watching it, even while I was watching it, I was like, so, what am I going to say? I honestly did not quite know what I was going to say, but eventually I figured it out and I presented my review. Star Wars Andor was an excellent show. The first 3 episodes of premiere, excellent. But weirdly enough, most Star Wars YouTubers have not been seeing the same types of engagement in their videos, views especially, like they normally do. I'm the exception. I normally get 10 to 15 views per video within the first 48 hours. And I had one that was already over 30, so I'm doing pretty good, but I'm the exception, not the rule. So there's that, but yeah, why is that? Perhaps Andor's just not as well connected. By that I mean, it doesn't have that many Easter eggs. It doesn't have that many references to existing Star Wars properties. It's just following, at this point, one character from one movie that wasn't a Skywalker Saga film. Could that be hurting it? I hope it's not, because it's been a very good show. But perhaps, for those who aren't tuned into everything Star Wars, it's just not as appealing as it could be, and as it should be, because it is great. The 3-episode premiere of Andor was amazing. It felt like Star Wars, but at the same time, it didn't feel like Star Wars. Not relying on the traditional tropes, but still very much in the world of Star Wars. You can pick up on that. It's subtle, but it's amazing. Really, the premiere, it was just great. Very excited for the way the story is going to be developing, for the formation of Rebellion, Cassian Andor's own character development. It really is, I think, a very good Star Wars. It might be the best Star Wars show to date, especially for live action. It might displace the Mandalorian. We have to see how it goes, but it's looking that way for sure. The only question is, will it be better than the Clone Wars? That's a very tall order, but it may just get there. So I just finished watching the 4th episode of Star Wars Andor, and I gotta say, I have some thoughts on it. So very much seems like they're taking, I'm gonna say, the Clone Wars approach, where there'll be multiple episode arcs. So this is, I believe, going to be another 3-episode arc. So the big climax of the plot that they're setting up in this episode is going to end in, well, not next week, but the week after that. Essentially the next 3 episodes are telling a solid arc, is what I'm getting the impression of. We're going to see Cassian maybe get more used to the idea of fighting the Empire. We're going to see more political story going on, since Mon Mothma has finally been introduced into the show. I also suspect we're going to see a lot more of Imperial infighting, since the ISB is now in, and it looks like they're going to kind of take on the role that the Corporals had in the first 3 episodes, which I think is going to be very interesting. And we're going to see, and we're actually already seeing some of the same tensions where, like, the higher ups, they're following things bureaucratically, we gotta work on verified information. Meanwhile, the one ISB who probably, if they let her, do what she's requesting, she will probably snap the rebellion now because she's following her gut instinct. But that's not how the Empire operates. The Empire operates basically by, you do as you're told and that's it. Is that verified? Nope. Well, you verify it before we do anything else. That's very much the mentality that the ISB and thus the Empire seems to be taking. And then, I forget his name, but the main corporal, antagonist in last episode, I have a feeling in the next 2 episodes we're going to see him and this ISB lieutenant start working together to fight the rebellion, and maybe that's what helps push the ISB to actually take the rebellion on. But another very interesting thing I picked up is actually in the main story following Cassian. They're on the pen Andor, which happens to also be the name of the episode, if I pronounced it right, of course. But I'm getting some very Scottish vibes from the planet. Highlands, lowlands. Highlands, you got sheep farming, and the population has been displaced to the lowlands, where all the industry and commerce is. Man, why does that remind me very much like Scotland? I mean, literally, what happened is, well, the rich saw benefit in the Highlands in Scotland, so they basically not necessarily replaced them, but pushed them out so they can do even more sheep farming, large scale, not just small isolated herding. Doesn't seem like the Empire's quite doing that, but sending them into the more populated lowlands where there's more work, more industry, and in many cases sent them off to the colonies. I have a feeling this parallel, I'm not going to say it's not even parallel, the similarity, because it's not identical, but I have a feeling this was intentional by the writers, using similar industries and terminology, and there is so much similarities, and it makes sense. The Empire has always been portrayed with speaking with British accents. In fact, when the ISB scenes, one of the ISB, I don't know if he's the director, but he's a higher up, he literally says instead of lieutenant, lieutenant. That's very British. And I have a feeling that's all intentional to draw those parallels between the Empire and British imperialism/colonialism. Very much intentional, I think. But yeah, that's just a little side trend there. But I also really do enjoy getting back to the political suicide. Seeing Mom Mumford, probably more. We've seen of the I forget the actor's name, but more of her in all of Rogue One and even her deleted scenes combined. But very much show that she's, a little bit paranoid, her driver, everybody, practically 90% of the people she's interacted with, well, they're brand new people, new drivers, new guards, new bank tellers even. So that paranoid, because she's, one of these has to be a spy, right? You catch me doing something that the Empire can actually sew the book at her for. I have a feeling that's what's going through her head. And of course we also meet her husband, who's very much not her. And that may sound weird, to phrase it that way, because obviously her husband is a her, but very much seems like he's the kind, he enjoys his stats, he enjoys rubbing shoulders with the rich and powerful of the Empire. He doesn't really care about the political aspects of it, he just likes being in the environment and having a good time. I mean, literally to the point where he's having a dinner party inviting top advisors to the Emperor himself, and Mom Martha's obviously not comfortable with that. I bet she's thinking in her head, what can I do to get out of this? But, very much interesting to see. And also, I hope when we get some mention of Bail Ghana in this, how she'd rather be at a dinner party with him or something like that, just to kind of show that, there are elites that she'd rather be hanging out with, because at least she knows that they are aligned to a certain degree. How much is still a question at this time, but, she knows that if she'll have a better time at such an event and won't feel bored. But I don't really think it's bored. She'd say it's boring, but I think it's more of she doesn't want to be around the people who, if she makes a slip of the tongue, can get her in trouble. That's, I think, what's going on. But it's a very interesting thing. And also Lucen, who recruited Andor, Cassian, he's obviously works as a middleman between Mom Montfort and a bunch of rebel cells, helping supply funding and all that to them, which is very interesting. But I do kind of like that. And he also, puts on a disguise. Seems like he used his antiques as a cover. But that does kind of make sense. But this is a very interesting episode because it's all set up, which makes sense in what looks to be a 3-part story. Episode 1, actually in this case it's episode 4. But this one's going to set it up. We're going to see, I'm guessing, in the next episodes, plots as develop, tensions develop, maybe distrust and trust gained and lost. And then I have a feeling in the last episode we're going to get the final climax of this arc. It's going to be, I'm going to guess, the ISB lieutenant and the corporal who was the main antagonist of the last 3 episodes are going to swoop in during Cassian and the rebel, so he's been inserted with, raid on an Imperial base to steal basically the entire payroll for a sector. I mean, that's all going to come together in the 3rd episode. But I gotta say, stealing a payroll is a genius move, because think of this. low-paid soldiers are not motivated. Sure, they may be in there for ideological reasons, but let's be real. You don't pay soldiers, they don't do their job. I mean, the only people who do things not for money are those who are truly invested ideologically in the cause. Which I have a feeling we're going to see Cassian develop, because at this point he's working for money, but eventually we know he's all in on the rebels. And I have a feeling we're going to see that develop. And there's so much more I could talk about this, but that move with stealing the paper is brilliant, because, I mean, those Imperials, they'll be like, probably some of them have families they need to support, so like, if they don't have money, they're going to be less likely to fight for the Empire, and that's going to cause discontent in the ranks, which is a brilliant move when you're fighting asymmetrically. Sometimes, striking at the base, sure, that may cause some damage, but what if you can cause more psychological and long-term damage to the Empire? That's a much better strategy, and that seems to be essentially the story that they decide to go with for the Rebels. Now, whether it succeed or not is, well, it remains to be seen. And this episode also is probably the first one when you can say there are true Easter eggs. Because in the other episodes, they're all Easter eggs. They're all, snippets and all that referencing other Star Wars. But what those are more are, I will call them world-building Easter eggs. They're the kind that serves the story. In one of the reference books for Rogue One, mentioned Andor's home world was Fest. Well, it turns out Fest was just a cover name. And there's a few other things. All that stuff is world-building Easter eggs. This has world-building Easter eggs like the Rebel stuff that I was casting and been inserted with. One that mentions Saw Gerrera, and how one rebel was talking to another rebel and said, hey, if you were with the Parsons on Saw Gerrera and you fell asleep on your post, yeah, you'd be dead. So just kind of to show that that's a world-building Easter egg. But you go into Lucian's antique shop, and all those in the background, let's be real, except for one that helps us a little bit of the story, all the others that they didn't mention directly, yeah, that's not a world-building Easter egg yet, because it's not been incorporated into the story. It's just there to serve as set dressing, to help expand the world, but not necessarily the story or the world-building of the story. And also another neat little thing too is, Lucian gives Cassian a down payment, which is essentially a crystal. I saw it first as a Kyber crystal, but it's not that. It's another type of crystal, so I think it's two crystals put together, and one that might have been Kyber. I should have rewatched that scene to get the terminology right. But he essentially gives this is your down payment, I want it back, but when you give it back, I'll give you your full payment. So it sounds like more collateral, but also says like, if something happens and I can't pay you, you do have this as a backup. That seems like what they were doing with that, which I think is a very unique way of, showing that Cassian's not fully in this fight yet for personal reasons, but perhaps at the end, Lucian won't be able to pay Cassian, but Cassian will still give that crystal back as a sign of he's in it for the fight. He's in there to defeat the Empire. He's not there for the money anymore. I have a feeling that's what they were setting up with that scene. Sure, mentioning the content with that, and how that crystal was created to celebrate a victory against the Rakatan invasion. That was a great Easter egg, though, but also serves as world building. Used to explain why this artifact is so important to Cassian, so that way that can put in his mind that, well, I can sell this for a lot of money, or I can give it back if I get a full payment. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I have a feeling that's been set up. Sure, a little bit of world building Easter egg there, but the main part of that, the crystal, is to show that at the end that Cassian is connected to the rebellion, and that's my prediction, that he is going to give it back despite not getting his payment. That's what I think is going to happen, but we have to wait to see. There's so many other things I wish I could discuss, such as how one of the younger rebels, it's clear that he's model making because he made a physical model so they can plan out their attack on the Imperial garrison, where the payroll is. Just neat this thing how he's very careful with it. Also makes me worry that he's going to be the one that dies first. So there is that. Also, I do wonder if what other plot points from the first 3 episodes are eventually going to be weaved in? Is Cassian going to discover his sister? And one thing I was wondering, what if she somehow got herself involved in the Empire? That would be very interesting to see, and that would make some good character development for Cassian. it's just a start, and this would be, I think, a great place to throw that in. But I'm also wondering, is Cassian, seeing Adari being reminded of his homeworld of Canary at all? People displaced because of the Empire coming in. I do wonder, Empire, Republic, except they're all the same. Which is something that Newton does touch on in appealing to Cassian to get him to agree to this. So very interesting, all the stuff they set up, and I can't wait to see how it pays out. Hey there, it's JohnBerry555, and welcome to my review of the 5th episode of Star Wars Andor, the episode entitled being The Axe Forgets. We actually figure out what the meaning of the title is super early on, which is also the theme of the episode very much, is basically there's a conversation between Cassian and one of the rebels he's been inserted with. I forget his name, but basically what he says is the axe will forget the tree it cuts down, but the tree won't forget. In other words, those who caught, and also stated during all that, is that it's easier for the Empire, and by extension tyrants, to hide behind multiple atrocities than just one. Which does make sense. It's happening all the time, so you just get used to it. School shootings. Yeah, seriously, I know I kind of tried to make that into a joke, but that's true. We are so used to them happening in America that we're becoming numb to them. When things happen all the time, you become numb to them. I mean, in one of my high school science classes, when the lights were flickered the entire year. Did we notice it by the end? No, we became used to it. And that's, I think, what's kind of going on here is the Empire is operating on the assumption that it's going to be happening all the time, so people will just get used to it and fall in line. But the thing is, the axe has done so much it's forgetting, seems everyone else will forget, but the tree won't forget. So each rebel remembers what got them into the fight and why they are fighting against the Empire. And each atrocity only adds more fuel to their hatred of the Empire. There's a reason why there's an increasing amount of people pushing for gun control and other reforms in order to stop school shooting. They're sick of it. Each one that happens, they're not becoming numb to it anymore, they're becoming angrier. So in a sense, it's a tipping point, if you will. If the Empire can't get control of the population soon enough, the atrocities will amount to a point where people can no longer look the other way. It's become so normal that they're sick of it. And that is actually kind of something interesting. Like, the axe will forget to the point keeps on doing things despite that it is going to hurt itself. But that's just kind of the story arc around the rebels and why they're fighting. That's really more of a philosophical approach to why the rebels are fighting. But we also get to see interpersonal conflict, distrust among them. And Cassian does lay it out that he's being paid to be there. That in order to help regain some of the trust in ways maybe he kind of senses that some of them are apprehensive. And basically says, I'm being paid, I'm going to be upfront with you so that way you don't have to use me as an excuse to back out. Which is actually kind of interesting. It kind of gives the impression that he's more into what their mission than some of the other rebels. Which is something kind of interesting to note. But then again, that's also probably him, probably Cassian probably maybe a little bit better understands what he is fighting for. He's seen the Republic, the Separatists, he's seen the Clone Wars, he's been through a lot more, he's traveled to multiple planets, so perhaps he has a better grasp of the, I'm going to say it, the geopolitical aspect maybe of this. That he was recruited by Lucen, who explained a little bit to him, and then of course with the youngest rebel, whose name I forgot, but I'm convinced is going to die in the next episode. He's thinking, geopolitically, strategically, okay, we're all mad at the Empire, we want our revenge, but we gotta think of what next and why we're fighting beyond revenge. Essentially, I'm very much the message from Rose Tico in The Last Jedi. Save what you love, rather than fighting what you hate. In a sense, that's, I think, kind of what this young rebel, he's also getting at. Which makes him also different from people like Saul, who's purely fighting the Empire due to hate of the Empire, now fighting for has maybe lost sight of fighting for a better tomorrow. So kind of a neat, interesting conflict there, if you will. And then, of course, we also do get scenes of Mon Mothma seeing a little more of political thriller and all that. But it's kind of pretty much limited. It's actually more family conflict going on between her and her husband and her daughter. Very much like, sounds like, maybe she's so focused on her job as a senator, trying to help people through that, she's neglecting her own family, but at the same time, there's also the fact that her husband is so used to the station, he doesn't really see things being, lower down. He doesn't really care about things less than him. Well, Mon Mothma does. Maybe she has become too disconnected from that because she's, does that make sense? Kind of disconnected, but in two totally different ways. But both leading to the same interpersonal family conflict. I'm interested to see how that develops. Then we also get more scenes with the ISB officer who's basically probably onto something coming the Rebel Alliance, but won't get in real probably because of the bureaucracy. But she has her aide on her side, and I have a feeling in the next episode she's going to be recruiting I forget his name, but the one corporal security officer who's now on Coruscant living with his mother, eating blue milk and cereal. Yeah. Which also contrasts with what Mon Mothma is having and her family's having for breakfast. So something interesting there as well to kind of take a note. But I have a feeling they're all going to come together and form a team that's going to be angering the Imperial superiors because they're actually trying to stop the Rebel Alliance because they're seeing the forest through the trees. In a sense, maybe she hasn't forgotten the act. She's the act that maybe hasn't forgotten yet. Something to consider, though. But I do think that could be some interesting conflict. Maybe even, I don't know how that could develop, but I think it could develop some unique and interesting ways that could actually see them in conflict with the Empire and in alliance with the rebels, but not in the sense of enemy of my enemy is my friend and joining the rebels. No, I have a feeling it's going to be more of, like, well, we're in the line. We want the Empire to know that there's a rebellion, that they, are messing up. And the rebels want the Empire to know that they can't do anything. So, and weirdly, they could come to a point where they start looking the other way so the Empire sees what the rebels are doing. Which could be a very weird thing, and I'm here for it. That's all spy thriller stuff. Sometimes you gotta let your enemy do stuff so you can prove that they're doing stuff. It's weird, but it is an interesting thought, and I hope they actually do develop that in the story. But that, I think, covers most of my thoughts on Andor. If I have any others, I'll record a quick YouTube short and throw it up on my channel. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know, what did you think of this episode? When I sat down to record this, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to say. But as I started speaking, I figured out what I wanted to say. So, there was a lot more in this episode than I thought I was going to talk about. So, what do you think? I would love to hear from you. Hey there, it's JohnBerry555 and welcome to my review of the 6th episode of Star Wars Andor. The episode being called The Eye. So, of course we obviously get to see the eye on Aldhani. That was the main point of the episode, right? It was beautiful. Okay, done. Review done. I'm done. Okay, not really. Really, this episode is about the heist that they performed during the Eye. You guys probably figured that out, obviously. But, yeah. They steal the Imperial a good portion of the Imperial payroll. How much of a total is hard to say. But they stole, let's see, they gave out, I believe, 88,000, something like what they actually managed to get away with. Don't know how much purchasing power that is. Sounds like it's a fair amount if all that. But yeah, so we get to see them sneak in, undercover, all of that. And of course, as expected, characters die. Okay, I don't know why I said it that way, but that's true. Characters did die. We were expecting this. Now, I didn't expect so many to die. The fact is, other people who went on the heist, only 3 came out alive. Obviously, Clem, came out alive. He obviously came out alive. I mean, it would have been a great shock if he was the one that didn't make it. I mean, talk about a twist, but that would be one awesome twist. Especially because it'd be interesting. So how are they going to get around that? You know, because of Rogue One and all that. But yeah, Val, and the other lady, I forget her name, but they also survived. It's basically, the Imperial Lieutenant who's siding with the rebels, Dawn is his name, I believe. He dies. One of them, I forget all their names, which doesn't really help. But basically, everyone nearly everyone died except for Cassian and then Vera and the other ladies. They were the only ones who survived. Which, yeah, it makes sense. Sounds like Dawn, like he was willing to die. You know, during the heist, he tells the Commodore basically, when the Commodore says that he'll hang for this, Dawn basically says, after 7 years here and what I've done, yeah, I deserve it. So that very much tells you he's not proud of his Imperial service. But we also learned that one of the other rebels there is a former Stormtrooper. The first time I think we've gotten a mention of a Stormtrooper at all in the show. No appearances, just his first mention. Because all the Imperials in here are Imperial Army. I don't think we've seen... The closest to seeing a Stormtrooper is the TIE pilots that we saw in this episode. So, I do find that interesting, but it does make sense. The Empire maybe is a bit more complacent. They're using Stormtroopers more in high-value situations. So potentially we might start seeing, actually we know from the trailers we'll eventually see Stormtroopers, but we'll probably see them coming up because the Rebels are becoming more increasingly a threat. So that means maybe some very loyal Imperial Army troopers are transferred to Stormtrooper and given Stormtrooper training and all that. Or maybe it's, the pressures of combat against the Rebels requires more Stormtroopers, so more Army troopers getting converted to Stormtroopers, which could explain why Stormtroopers end up becoming more ineffective because they're not trained properly. I mean, authoritarian regimes, they survive off of control of the military, and and if you feel like you need more shock troopers to inspire fear, what are you going to do? You're going to create more shock troopers even if they're not properly trained. So I do kind of like how they're showing that right now the Rebels are facing army troopers. They're not facing any stormtroopers yet. So I'd be interested to see in how do they compare. Will we also maybe see them get less skilled over time? I mean, it's some interesting thoughts that this episode made me think of. But yeah, and then as expected, the young rebel, whose name I forget, but who's writing the manifesto, he doesn't make it. He at least gets off the planet, but he doesn't make it. He gets crushed by the payroll, essentially. But all of us knew he was not going to make it. It was just something we were expecting, I think. None of us, but Cassian does take his manifesto after Vale gave it to him after he died. But I figured that was going to happen. Several people I know figured that out too, just as a prediction, which does make sense. If this shows about Cassian becoming a rebel, essentially, in the birth of the Rebel Alliance, him taking this manifesto is him like, okay, I will take it, I'll give it a read, that kind of thing. Because it sounds like he's definitely interested in fighting the Empire, but he's not committed to the rebel cause yet, which is kind of interesting. And then we have the other rebel who, he actually survived the heist. Cassian kills him. Yeah. Basically, so this is what makes me think that Cassian's not fully invested in the cause yet, but he's aligned to the cause, because when the other rebel, the one who I believe was a former prisoner, based off of the conversation with Cassian in the previous episode, if I'm getting my context clues correct, he basically says to Cassian, hey, how about we just take the freighter and split it 50-50, 44,000 each, something like that. And Cassian shoots him, but then he goes and demands Vale to give him his cut, and he'll leave the freighter for her, and he'll take the doctor's ship, because they need to go they went to a doctor to try to save the young rebel. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But it does make me kind of surprised. So that show, not surprised, but fascinating, interesting. As this is showing that Cassian, he wants what he got in for it, he wants what he thinks he is now owed or due. He was going to promise this amount, he wants to get that amount back. And he's like, I'll take only what I'm supposed to take, and you get to have everything else. And he also gives a Kyber crystal that Lucen gave him 2 episodes ago to Veil to give to Lucen, which I think is very interesting. Not interesting, similar to what I was predicting, but not quite. Because I remember I had predicted that Cassian won't get anything, but he'll still give the crystal back. Not quite what happened here, but it sounds very much like he gave the crystal back, which is showing that he's standing by his word, that he's somebody that Lucen will probably reach out to again for when he needs something done. That's I think what's going to happen. He's showing that maybe he's not fully invested yet, as I said earlier, but that he's becoming invested, that he's interested. For lack of a better term, he's interested, and with the right pushing and right motivation, he'll be fully committed, which we do see by the time of Rogue One. We also get a little bit of a shot of Mon Mothma and Lucen on Coruscant. Mon Mothma is doing a speech in the Senate, trying to push some legislation, but you can tell the Senate's empty. There's a few senators are in there are distracted, they're not paying attention. So yeah, makes me wonder, why don't you just call? I bet the Imperial Senate has some rules about a quorum being required to conduct business. How embarrassing would be if she asked for a roll call and they find out they don't have a quorum. Actually, that could really backfire when I think about it. But it is something kind of showing that the Imperial Senate is a rubber-stamped body. She's talked about passing an act in the Senate, passing a law, rather than an Imperial dictate. Which is showing that she's still trying to operate under democracy, that she's pushing for laws and that's probably one of the few senators who's actually trying to do stuff in the Senate rather than just, come in for a nice cozy check and a rich life on Coruscant while the Empire does whatever it's want. That's definitely that one little scene where I could take away from Mon Mothma. And then also we get a scene with Lucen too at the end where he's in his shop, all that, and the corporal from the first 3 episodes, and we've seen him, with his mother in the last 2. He's in the shop apparently reading a paper. Guess there's a sitting room there, I guess. And mentions the attack on Aldhani. It's almost like he's fishing for information. I wonder if he suspects something. Who knows? But Lucen goes in the back and laughs. Laughs in relief. That kind of laugh from it. That the attack went on and apparently it was in the papers. I mean, that's kind of interesting. But also, something to note is, I saw a lot of people speculating that Veil was Lucen's daughter. I don't know. I was looking for that to see if there's any indication in here, but I didn't see any. But I could be missing something. I see what they're saying in the last episode, but I was looking at this episode. And besides Lucen's sense of relief, I see no additional evidence. But also, something interesting. The other lady, not about the other one, puts on an Imperial uniform and goes to basically where the Aldhani are watching the Eye. And I was wondering, is she going to somehow start an Imperial massacre? I'm serious. Why was she doing that? It's so unexplained. And I think it's supposed to be unexplained. Sure, maybe that's actually just how she's going to get out of the Imperial base since she wasn't taking the cargo transport. But it does make me wonder, was she going to try to get the Empire to do something even worse in response to this that would make the news and galvanize people against the Empire? I don't know, because nothing like that was ever brought up. So maybe Occam's razor was just her disguise to get out, which, you know what, is a very likely possibility. But that's about all I have for this episode, my thoughts and opinions and review. I do wonder, the leader of the Aldhani tribes that come, or Elder, I should say, he's speaking in the local language with Lieutenant Dawn. He knew, but he did not translate it properly back to the Commodore in one scene, and I think the Elder picked up on that. But also it did make me wonder, how much did that Elder maybe knew what was going on, knew more than everyone else. They knew that they were being a distraction for something going on. It does make me wonder. Hey there, it's JohnBerry555 and welcome to my review of Star Wars Andor Season 1 Episode 7, announcement. This episode definitely seems to be set apart from the rest of the series in terms of, seems very much to be probably the only actual filler episode. Because it seems to me like it's going to be doing one main thing. It's going to be the connecting between the first two arcs that we're getting and then what the last two arcs that we're getting. Because very much this seems like, hey, bunch of stuff happened, bunch of stuff will happen. We need to get everything caught up and sync back together. So we'll create an episode that's just going to say, this is what's going on, everyone. Ready? Not quite like that, but this I think is the example of a true filler, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's not filler in the sense of, oh, they just needed to pad the time. No, it's filler in the sense of, we have the main story, but like, we need to make sure, we gotta connect, we got A done, we got B done, but we gotta make sure B and C are connected. So we need a B, maybe we change C to D and we'll throw in a new C. That kind of thing, it's the connecting glue that holds everything together. That's the impression I've gotten this. So, big rebel attack, so what does Empire do? They crack down hard. And that's going to set up what's going to happen in the next episode. Andor, we see he's on the run. We get to see more from our Mantra. Well, he's on the run, but he's not. So essentially, he goes back to Ferrix. There's an Imperial garrison. They're now actual stormtroopers. And speaking of stormtroopers, they're on Ferrix. They're on Coruscant now. Those are the only two real... Oh, and that whatever planet was at the end of the episode, I forget its name, but that resort planet, in other words. So, well, actually, those were show troopers, and which is also a pretty neat thing to just call out that show troopers appeared. But essentially, those stormtroopers were equipped for coastal and environments, coastal and I forget the other term, but basically the coastal regions, and islands and all that. So it makes sense actually, but it also makes sense that now that the Empire is cracking down on dissent, it's bringing the stormtroopers out and having them do security. So basically, this is kind of what I saw at the end of the last episode, but this episode really does cement it. The Empire, to this point in time, used probably stormtroopers mainly for, elite missions. They were the shock troops. They went after the storm. They were the ones that were assigned to go after Jedi, to assist the Purge troopers and Inquisitors. They're the ones who were sent to go after remaining Separatist remnants, Saw Gerrera's partisans. The Stormtroopers were the ones that were doing the main fighting. They were being elite shock troops. But now we're seeing them used as security. And I have a feeling that's why, by the time of the original trilogy, the Stormtroopers are so incompetent. Because they're being used for what they're not supposed to be used for. The Imperial Army is supposed to be doing security. They're the ones that are supposed to secure the installations, do security patrols, hold the front line while the Stormtroopers go in and do the actual combat. But what I'm going to guess now is, by bringing those Stormtroopers to do security, what that's going to do is deplete the resources. They'll need more Stormtroopers, which means probably going to have to force a relaxation in training standards and maybe even recruitment standards. I even predicted that an army unit, Imperial Army units, could be converted into Stormtrooper units because they need those troopers, the feel of the Stormtroopers. The Tarkin Doctrine is very much, I think, starting to be used in force. Harsh sentences in order to crack down on dissent. The Empire is cracking down, which is kind of what Lucen wanted. He does say as much. By cracking down, by the Empire now doing a more heavy-handed approach, people are going to get more uncomfortable, more willing to start rebelling. Which makes sense. This show is going to show the birth of the rebellion, so it makes sense that perhaps the Empire needs to be forced to be more heavy-handed because that will create more outrage and outrage much quicker. Some very unique stuff that it brings up. But yeah, we see the ISB basically in overdrive, like, okay, we're cracking down, we're going to take control, we're giving more powers, etc., etc., etc. We also get Yularen appearing. We knew from A New Hope that he does, and also Rebels, that he does become as the head of the ISB. We see him giving a speech to the ISB saying, now that this is going on, this is what you guys can do, crack down on it. And then, of course, the main ISB character we've been following, and her name slips me, but essentially she uses that for her own benefit by essentially getting the record she's been trying to get that her colleague has been blocking because it's outside of her sector. And so her immediate supervisor was like, good job, actually praised her for doing that, but told her to watch her back. But that's also very much the Imperial mentality, not Imperial mentality, but very much, if you essentially have to watch your back because people will stab you in the back in order to advance their goals. We actually saw this a little bit in the SWTOR game, Star Wars The Old Republic. We do see this in actually real life authoritarian regimes where you can't really trust your colleagues because they'll stab you in the back to advance just as you'll stab them in the back. So it's showing, she's showing initiative and getting stuff done. It is also a weakness in the system at the same time because that instability means there can't be effective cooperation. Resentment builds when you promote somebody for breaking the rules because they're getting stuff done, but at the same time not promote somebody because they're keeping the rules and getting stuff done. Like, that all breeds in resentment, especially if you do it unevenly. But that's also how you make sure that your subordinates don't rise up and replace you. But that very much fits in with the Sith mentality. I do like seeing how that's creeping into the rest of the Empire that they're really showing it. We also get, Mon Mothma, realizing what Lucen is doing, but also like acting essentially shocked. But then, and then later on in another conversation she has with a banker from Chinjula during a party, it's like reveals that she might be much more supportive of what Lucen is doing than she let on to Lucen, as all part of her essentially playing a double act. And she literally said that she took a lesson from Palpatine, i.e., basically do one thing in public while hiding what you're really doing behind. So essentially she's acting as the annoyance while she's doing something much more nefarious in the background from the Imperial perspective. But I really do kind of like that as a contrast, that cloak and dagger stuff. Well, nobody's being quite truthful with everyone else because they need to gauge how much can I trust this person and what can I trust them with. Quite, cloak and dagger stuff. It'd be very much interesting to see. And it wouldn't surprise me if, later on in the timeline where Mon Mothma does publicly announce the rebellion on that, if Palpatine might have given a chuckle like, I didn't see what she did there, she took a lesson from me. I'm also mad at her for that, but I do see what she was doing. That would be hilarious. Okay, that'd be more of a Lego Star Wars thing to do than non-Lego Star Wars, but still, it would be hilarious. But yeah, that kind of covers most of my thoughts. This episode is really about basically a major shakeup in how the Empire is policing the galaxy. From a maybe still heavy-handed, but much more quiet, perhaps actually even more insidious because nobody's really noticing it because it's slow and steady. The Empire is cracking down hard, galaxy-wide, not just where the incident was occurring. And at the same time, I think that's going to encourage more people to join the rebellion or to start rebelling. One thing that we see when Cassian returns to Ferrix is that his adoptive mother sounds like she's pretty much willing to go. Even though Cassian offers to get them both off board, she says she's going to stay, and she does. But it's very much implied that she's going to stop making herself a head like for the local Imperial garrison. Cassian also pays off all the debts he had to all his friends on Ferrix and then leaves. So very interesting there, but also showing some flashbacks during all this. So very much we learned that Clem, the reason why Cassian chose that name was because that was the name of his adoptive father, which makes sense. Who is implied during a republic occupation of Ferrix during the Clone Wars. Later in the war, because it's Phase 2 armor clone troopers. But essentially, some local residents were throwing rocks or snowballs at the clones, and he was trying to diffuse the situation, but by the time the clones turned around, he was the only one standing where those rocks were coming from. So it sounds like he got punished for that and got hanged. Yeah, so definitely showing how the Republic became an empire before it became an empire in name. Kind of reminds me a bit of the Roman Empire when you think about it. But we also get to learn that Cassian's adopted mother never went to that square because it would remind her of all that until after all the stuff that Cassian did, which is kind of interesting. But it's very interesting what they're doing there and how they're building it up. And I wouldn't be surprised if we hear in the next episode or two that Cassian's adopted mother is killed by the Empire. I'm just expecting that to happen sooner or later. But yeah, Cassian's in hiding now. He's taking a name. But he still gets arrested because he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the Empire, because they'll crack down, it's zero tolerance on any kind of dissent. Doesn't matter how minor that. Zero tolerance. It's presumption of guilt. You can't even argue for your innocence. And all punishments have, literally, for essentially being in the wrong place at the wrong time, before the crackdown, his punishment only would have been 6 months. It's 6 years now. So you can kind of see, the rebels, by forcing the Empire to act heavy-handed, is going to create more dissent against the Empire. Which does make sense. A state built off of fear and basically rule of force, it's a house of cards. If you can't maintain the support of the people, it's going to collapse. That's true for any government, but I think especially true for those that rely on the fear and force. Meaning you have no actual popular support. So if people get sick of the force and fear that you're using to keep them in line, you're forcing them to be like, hey, you guys were keeping order before, so we were willing to look away at a few of the more unsavory aspects, but now you're affecting us directly. You're punishing people for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That, I think, is going to help turn the galaxy against the Empire. So it's very interesting to see where Andor is going. I thought this was a very good episode. Yes, was it filler? Probably, but it was the right kind of filler. The filler that connects things together, especially when you have an overarching story. Sometimes you guys take a step back, the main story is going on in the background, but you still need to be like, okay, a bunch of stuff has happened. We kind of need to fill stuff in so people know what's going to happen next. So that's the kind of filler this is. The right kind, the kind that helps build the story. It may not be the main story arc, but it's contributing to all the little arcs. Including with that one Espo, whose name is guy who's living with his mother. Now he's got a desk job at least, but you can tell he's not happy. But I think it's only a matter of time before he's recruited into the ISB. But we have to wait to see for that. Hey there, it's JohnBerry555, and welcome to my review of Star Wars Andor Season 1, Episode 8, Narkina 5, or the Narkina 5. Regardless, we can just move right on to talk about the episode. So my overall thoughts, so these are my spoiler-free thoughts, just the general overview. This episode sets up basically the next stage in Andor's character development, but also in the formation of the rebellion. We see Lucen. Okay, we're getting to spoilers now, but some of the stuff was in the trailers. We see Lucen trying to bring more cells together, and we also see we finally see the prison stuff that we saw in the trailers, and we also see increasingly the Empire cracking down on any form of dissent, no matter how trivial, and how life is like for those the Empire actually has oppressed, and also the ISB's hunt to find Andor. But before we get to that, let's talk about the political intrigue, everything dealing with Mon Mothma. So, in many ways, it is a bit repetitive. It's the same political intrigue that we saw in previous times before, her putting on one face with some people and a different face with other people, speaking in veiled wording, so that way the Empire and any spies listening won't be able to figure out what's really going on. But it is repetitive, but I think that's the point. The political intrigue, the game never ends. You always have to be stating the same stuff over again. You're never actually going to get anywhere. But you might, but you never expect to get anywhere. So it's going to be the same old stuff over and over again. The same veiled threats. The same just keeping your true intentions hidden. All that's the same. I think that's intentional. I think it's supposed to be repetitive to show us how the political wheels are stuck. Or they're not changing at all. While Mon Mothma is, coating the wheels of power, getting funding with the Rebel Alliance, Lucen's, he's listening into stuff. He actually goes to see Saw Gerrera to try to get him more involved in a greater rebel movement rather than acting on his own, trying to like, hey, I'll give you these parts and supplies you need, but in exchange, I'll give them for you for free, but you have to go help this other rebel cell, which Saul doesn't want you. And Saul, very much in his rebuttal, he very much intensifies why the Rebel Alliance is having such difficulty forming. You have separatists, you have rebels, you have anti-imperialists, you have people who are fighting to restore the Republic, you have anarchists, which is alluded Saul to be one. You got human supremacists, I think even Saul. Like, there's so many different rebels and factors and partisan groups fighting the Empire. It seems like Saul, he doesn't want to work with any of them because they're not advancing his interests. And I think part of what we're going to see is Lucien Massima working and trying to bring those cells together to actually form a rebel alliance. Not to mention, it's just amazing how Lucien and Saul just, even though I think they both knew that Lucien was responsible for the attack on Aldhani, they both play like they don't know who it is, but thinks the other. They both act the exact same way. And that's just a neat little scene. It does show that they have worked together. They may not be proper allies per se, but they're definitely no strangers to each other. Of course, during all of this, Cassian, he's hiding out, but he was captured at the end of the last episode by the Empire on trumped up charges. Man, imagine if they actually knew what charges he would face if they actually had his right name and he didn't, pretend to have another name, or just if they just knew he was on Aldhani. It's quite interesting that they had one of the people responsible but didn't realize it. But that's neither here or there, because Cassian is sent to a prison, an Imperial prison, and you can tell he's not sure exactly what's going on, probably because he expected just to be incarcerated briefly on whichever planet he has been captured on. I don't think he was actually expected to have the Empire send him off planet to some other prison facility. I do not think that he expected that. And he ends up being sent to a work prison. The work prison that Cassian is sent to is on, I'm thinking it's a moon, Arcana 5, the episode's title. And it is a work prison where the prisoners are forced to work, but not only are they forced to work, but they are encouraged by basically threat of punishment to be as productive as possible. So it's organized in such a way that each prisoner is somewhat competing against each other, because each prisoner is assigned to a table that they have to work at, which is assigned to a room, which is assigned to, it's just keep on every single stage of it, there is some form of competition. Basically, and whichever table is the most productive in each room gets flavor in the food, and whichever is the least productive gets punished. And that's creating a sense of competition, making so that prisoners can't actually work together. It's that divide and conquer strategy that authoritarians and fascists use all the time to cement their power and their control. But that power is not absolute. We see in one scene, one prisoner is communicating to another prisoner using some form of hand signs, so a sign language. So there is communication between the different rooms and the different cells. And, well, not cells per se, but between those different groups that the Empire has forcibly isolated the prisoners apart. And Cassian saw that, so I'm thinking when he figured out how he's going to get out here, I have a feeling those hand signals will somehow be used to facilitate that in some form. It's just a thought I had, but I think it could be quite interesting. And another neat little thing as well I picked up on is there was more than one prison on this planet. So each individual prison facility is probably competing against each other for that productivity. It's not just each block in the prison and each room in the block. It's a full level of competition, so they can't work together because the prisoners outnumber the guards. Prisoners outnumbering guards is nothing new to a prison. It's very much a factor of many prisons where you have more prisoners than guards, and they normally control it by essentially stripping the prisoners of all their rights. And really, the Empire takes that to the extreme. The floor of their cell block is basically some kind of electrified. That means if in the middle of the night they stand up to stretch and step outside the cell, they're dead. If there's a prison riot, the floor is being turned on and the prisoners are probably going to be dead. So not only are they controlling them through the standard prison stuff for dehumanizing them, forcing them to do menial labor that probably, a droid, especially in Star Wars, could do, or some form of machinery. But they're also literally dehumanizing them in the sense that they're not getting good food, they're just getting nutritional food. They're basically getting nothing. No liberties, no freedoms at all. While Cassian's in that prison, things are not doing that well on Ferrix. Cassian's adopted mother Marva is not doing well. It's pretty much implied that she's sick and that she's fallen more than once since Cassian has left, and that she's hoping she's hoping to do some kind of attack against the Empire, even though she's not really capable of it. And so Cassian's probably two best friends on Ferrix, so Bix and Joplin, are doing their best to take care of her, but clearly she's being quite stubborn and doing her own thing. But you can definitely tell everything's not doing super well on Ferrix. The Empire's presence is even greater than when we last saw Ferrix in the last episode. They're just everywhere, and by the end of the episode, we see that the ISB is on the planet. And the ISB is on that planet looking for Cassian, because that's the only lead they have on Cassian. They still haven't connected him to Aldhani yet, but it's only a matter of time, I'm sure. But so they interrogated one of Bix's friends, and that's who Bix uses his shop to get in contact with Lucen. And then Bix is arrested by the ISB, and they take her in to be interrogated. And Supervisor Jedha is the one who's doing all this. And what's quite interesting is that during all this, she interrogates and all that. Bix tries to run, but she is captured. But when she's brought in for questioning, her friend is there, and Jedha purposely leaves him there so Bix to see, but acts like it was not supposed to be, trying to intimidate Bix into talking, because she wants to find where Cassian is. Of course, Ferrix is not the only source of information to find Cassian that the ISB has at their disposal, because there's also Cyril, who's brought in by Jedha to be interrogated. Apparently he's been submitting false reports trying to hunt down Cassian. Of course, that gets the attention of the ISB, but besides giving the ISB some information and thinking he could work with them, the ISB wants to use him but not work with him. They're not recruiting him, they're just questioning him as a person of interest. And clearly Cyril is not comfortable with that. He wants to be involved in hunting down Cassian. And it does make me wonder, how much will his loyalty to the Empire and Order impact his decision making? Could there come to be a point where he's fighting the rebels and the Empire? It'd be very interesting to see a literal authoritarian fascist rebel. It would be interesting to see that, and I would like to see that explored. And given how Andor as a show has been showing us a darker side of the Rebel Alliance and the Rebels, in some ways it wouldn't be that far a stretch to see that there are factions of the Rebel Alliance who are anti-democracy, who are anti-freedom, who are essentially the only reason why they're against the Empire is because they believe the Empire is not properly securing order. And sure, we saw conflict with Saw and the Rebel Alliance, both in Rebels and in Rogue One, and a bit between the conversation between Lucen and Saw earlier in the episode, but I'm just wondering, it would be very interesting to see if there's a faction of rebels who are literally at odds with the rest of the rebels on everything but being against the Empire. And Cyril would fit that bill. Probably won't happen, but it's a weird thought that I had while watching this episode. I'm willing to see what happens. But going back to Ferrix, the ISB is not the only potential threat on Ferrix, as Vel and Cinta are on Ferrix trying to find Cassian because Lucen's assistant has instructed them to kill Cassian. And for very much, I think Cinta is more likely to kill Cassian outright, while Vel is probably more willing to question Cassian and maybe properly recruit him. Because I very much get the impression from their conversation that Cinta is more extreme, for lack of a better term. We know that they are a couple and all that, but it's very clear that Cinta is much more committed to the cause, to fighting the Empire, than Vel is. In terms of, now Vel is still very committed, we can tell that, but she's more like, we'll fight the Empire, but it's okay if we take a break every once in a while to recoup and indulge in our personal actions. But there's some conflict between them, and showing the Rebel Alliance is not a unified force yet. That's my main takeaways from the episode. There's a lot going on, but I really am excited how they're showing the Rebel Alliance being built, and how the Rebel Alliance is not yet a cohesive force, and how even once they become more unified, they may still not be cohesive and fully united. I can't wait to see that developed, and I really can't wait for the next episode. I can't wait to see the prison break, because there's going to be a prison break. Cassian has to get out. Rogue One is coming up eventually in the timeline. Hello, is anyone listening? Hey, this is JohnBay555, and welcome to my review of Star Wars Andor Season 1, Episode 9, Nobody's Listening. So, that's very much the theme of the episode, that nobody is listening. Well, some people are listening, but the people in power aren't listening. So, because there's the two main stories going on. Oh, actually, there's actually three. You got Andor in the prison, you got Mon Mothma in the Playground intrigue, and then you also have the ISB investigation into the Rebel Network. And it's clear the ISB is now listening to the ISB, so at least they're listening to themselves, but they're not really listening to what's going on, because they don't realize by pushing the rebels, they're probably going to embolden the rebels, make the rebels more likely to rebel. They may be listening, but they're not paying attention. But you go looking at with Andor and then with Mon Mothma, what's going on for them is like truly very few people are listening. In the prison, the guards are not listening to the prisoners, because that's what, and that connects back to how Andor basically, Cassian and all that earlier on, is like, hey, the Empire doesn't care about us, so why would they pay attention to us except for when we cause trouble for them? Very much like, only when you get caught does the Empire actually pay attention. Meanwhile, with Mon Mothma, she's speaking in the Senate, trying to get people to listen, but most of them don't care. There's a few of them who do, but none of them probably actually care about, making the galaxy better. They just want to live off the station. The Empire is not listening to what's going on. And think of this, Mon Mothma is saying some pretty inflammatory stuff in the Senate when you really think about it. Stuff that could undermine the Empire. But nobody's listening. Sure, maybe the ISB is paying somewhat attention to her, but all the stuff we're seeing with the ISB, she's not even on their radar. Maybe some higher ups are, but she's not being paid attention to. Nobody's literally listening to her and look for her and we don't see the Empire pay attention, listen to her until much later in the timeline. Couple years, 2 years, I think, maybe 3. We saw that actually in Star Wars Rebels. But here in the prison, like, the Empire is not listening. They don't care about the people there, so they don't listen. They don't pay attention to them. They only care about is stuff getting done and making sure that no prisoner gets wise to the fact that they're not actually releasing anybody. And we do find that out, and that's very neat with Andy Serkis's character, who he's basically the manager of the cell block system thingy that Cassian is in, and all that. But you can also see Cassian is taking more of a leadership role, because there's actually one instance where Andy Serkis's character loses control, and it's Cassian who smooths things over temporarily, and all that. And there's other little things here too. And then at the very end, after the old gentleman who was supposed to be only 40 shifts away, so that's still 40 shifts. That's a long time. Though the closest for any of them to these. Well, he has a massive stroke, and so when the medic comes, who happens to be also a prisoner, by the way, euthanizes him, that's what makes Andy Serkis' character to realize he can't continue operating under the system the way it was. And the question Cassian has been asking him this entire time, basically, how many guards are there? He finally answered that. After basically saying, keep your head down and all that, just, wanting to work in the system, climb it and all that for his own benefit. But the fact that somebody he saw who was getting close to being released didn't make it, that's in a way what changed his mind. Like, yeah, the Empire is not going to let us out, And especially because that's also when they confirmed the rumor, because the medic is obviously one person who gets to travel around a bit more. but or medtech, not medic, I think is the term they use. But regardless, confirms what happened on level 2, because essentially during one of the shift changes, there's they are passing messages from each other, so there's basically rumors going on, and something happened on level 2. There was a huge power surge. They knew something happened. They knew there were rumors about potentially somebody, maybe the entire level 2, all those prisoners are being killed, but they didn't know for sure. But the medtech confirmed it. So that, plus the old man who was the closest to being released, dying, that's what changed Andy Serkis' character's mind. And so I suspect him, Cassian, and I forget his name, but he actually appeared in Rogue One, so we know he's surviving. I have a feeling they're going to be the ones who are probably going to be doing a lot more of the planning on what to do. We're going to get a prison break, obviously. Andor needs to be out by the time of Rogue One, without a doubt. So we're going to get that. And I suspect Andy Serkis' character will not make it. I just have a feeling we know at least 2 of these characters will make it out and join the Rebel Alliance. We don't know how many others. But I have a feeling Andy Serkis' character, he won't make it. Because I have a feeling he'd be like, I just know why, but I have this feeling that after all this time, trying to save himself, in other words, climb the ladder of the fascist regime of the Empire without thinking he could work within the system when it's clearly not going to work. I wonder if he's going to be I wonder if he's going to take the opportunity to be serve as a distraction or do something so that way everyone else can get away. It's just a thought I had. I could be wrong, but it's something to keep an eye out, I think, in the next episode. And then, of course, we get some other things of Mon Mothma's political intrigue, how, clearly the Empire is not really paying attention, but we get some good news. Her cousin's there to visit, who happens to be Val from the heist arc and all that. I mean, so I do like that little connection there, and showing that Mon Mothma does have family who actually does support her rebelling against the authority of the Empire. Because Mon Mothma, much like any Serkis character, is trying to work within the system, but it's much clearer that she knows that the system, she does know that she can't fully work in the system. She knows that the system is designed not to work. But in some way, she's like, what can I do within the system so to try to make things better? But I think she's always known in the back of her mind that the system will never work out. She can't work within it. I think she knew that in the back of her head. But I think it's only now that she's starting to truly realize that, yeah, the system I can't do it anymore, kind of thing. I have a feeling that's the mentality that she's in her mind space. But yeah, anything else I need to discuss? Mothma also is going to have to probably take a loan from an unreputable source to help cover up the fact that she's giving money to the rebel cause and all that. So that's going to be interesting how that plays out. But yeah, we also know that the ISB is getting closer. They've already connected Cassian to the heist on Aldhani. So they've done that. They are torturing, and this is actually probably some of the most visible torture we've seen in Star Wars. Literally, Bix is literally tortured using audio, and we don't get to hear what it is, but it's described to us. Screams and cries of dying children, basically. It's basically audio torture. No chemicals, no electrical, just pure psychological horror. And that really just shows how evil the Empire is, because, Dedra, she's like, yep, this is what it is. If you don't talk, we're going to subject you to this. Meanwhile, the scientist, doctor person who's going to be mystery is that he's creepy as fuck. And I'm going to use that word because he is creepy AF. He knows exactly what's going on. And the way he describes it, it's like he's taking joy in describing it. The Empire is full of bad people. I don't know if you saw, but over the last week, the actress who plays Dedra made a statement talking about how Gilroy wrote Dedra to essentially to show that in a fascist system, women can become corrupt just like men. It doesn't matter the gender. Anyone can be corrupt if they work within the system to work in the system for their own personal benefit and all that stuff. So that does connect with what any Serkis character and Mon Mothma are doing. But any Serkis character, he's more like, keep his head down to not get in trouble. Mon Mothma is like, how can I work within the system to actually, right the wrongs? And both those characters are clearly seeing that's not going to work. But Jedha, she's not seeing that because she's working within the system for her own power, for her own personal power and prestige. She's not going to come to realization because the system's working for her and has corrupted her to her core, so she doesn't care. We initially, as fans, were rooting for her because, oh, strong woman working against a patriarchal authority. Yeah, she's just right in there along with them. The only thing was, it's the cut sword nature of the Empire to butt heads. And we all kind of knew it, but we all because, being the main female bad guy, we automatically started rooting for her, even though she was in opposition to everything else that we would be rooting for, Andor and Mon Mothma, which is quite interesting. But I think that just shows how effectively they wrote her as a human character. A human character who was faced with basically what seemed to be systemic problems that prevented her from getting ahead. Turns out the systemic problems were just, corruption, were just more, not necessarily corruption, but more imperial incompetence and imperial power struggles rather than anything else. But still, it does show, in regards to the system, anyone can be corrupted, especially when they're looking out for themselves only and don't see the faults in the system like Mon Mothma or Andy Serkis' character did and have seen, and all that. And of course, circling back to other topics about going on, Cyril. He's there apparently with the ISB for his cooperation. They wiped his slate clean, so he was able to get a promotion at work. That's good. But he is also showing that he's not just, a guy who wants to be respected. But think of this. He has such social ineptitude. Being interrogated by the SB was seen as human connection to him. He's essentially now stalking Jedha. Who knows how that's going to work out? I have a feeling for both of them, not good at all. But definitely show the kind of guy Cyril is. He's not a good guy. He may eventually come to butt heads with the Empire, but it's not going to be because he doesn't believe in the Empire or believe in the system, but because the system is not working for him personally, because he's not getting the benefits. He wants to climb the ranks of the Empire. He wants to be noticed. He wants to establish order. But what will happen if he's not getting what he wanted? Will he lash out at the Empire because he's not getting what he wants in the system? He's that kind of guy. He's probably the kind of guy that if he lived in America, he would definitely own a gun. It would have both, a Don't Trend on Me flag, a Confederate flag, and probably even a Trump flag. He's probably that kind of guy who says he's an alpha male and nothing, and he's a tough guy and all that. But when it comes down to it, he's not anything like that. He's a mama's boy who is coddled and whose mother is only using him to climb the social ladder herself. And so the minute things get tough, he's either going to break down or he's going to make a rash decision that's going to destroy his life. He's not a good guy. He's the kind of guy who will get sucked down rabbit holes and end up believing conspiracy theories. That's the kind of guy I'm getting the impression that Cyril is. He may eventually be in opposition to the Empire if he's not getting what he wants, but I don't think that's going to happen because he thinks he can get what he wants. So, it could be very interesting to see, but the Empire might see him as a threat because he's not towing the proper line properly. He's not in the system enough for them. I just got a real feeling that he's going to end up somehow in opposition to the Empire to help the Empire, if that makes any real sense. But he's not truly helping the Empire, but he's truly going to be helping himself to achieve power in his own life. His mother wants power and he's willing to live vicariously through him for that. He's willing to stalk an ISB officer just to, creepily say, thank you for clearing my record and getting me a promotion. He's not a good guy. I can easily see him being the kind of guy who will, if things don't go his way, lash out violently. And because he's never had the proper support structure. Probably literally being the corporals was probably the best support structure he ever had. And essentially by wanting more, he destroyed probably what was the closest thing he had to a stable social life. Which is quite sad when you think about it. That if he just took a step back and got some therapy and reevaluated his life, he needs Obi-Wan Kenobi to tell him to go home and rethink his life. But that's not going to happen to him. He's going to make a decision that's going to help the rebels and hurt the Empire because of him trying to get ahead himself. And him trying to get what he thinks he is owed. Even though, by all accounts, he's not owed anything. he didn't save any lives. He actually made things worse overall for everyone, Empire and Rebel alike already. He thinks he's owed something, but when it comes down to it, I don't think he's actually owed anything besides a better home life. That's all he's owed, because then maybe he actually can make something good of his life, but that won't happen given his environment, essentially the fact that he wants power. He wants to be respected. He doesn't want to earn that respect. He wants to take that respect and that power. That's the kind of guy he seems to be from my perspective. I could be totally wrong, but yeah, he would totally be out there chanting, lock her up back in 2016. I would think he's that kind of guy. But anyhow, that's why I'm going to conclude this review. I'm sure I just angered a bunch of people online, but you know what? Engagement. That is engagement, and they can play in my comment section down below. But speaking of comment section, let me know, what did you think of this episode? Do you agree with my conclusions? Do you disagree? I would love to hear from you and have a civil debate about all of this. And, I can't believe I even forgot this, but another neat little thing I picked up on is Mom Monster's husband and parent is so not connected with basically his wife's cousin's life that he doesn't even know that she's not into guys. That shows how disconnected. He just wants to live in luxury and all that. But, okay, that was just a little thing there, but that also shows how he's totally fine with being in the system, the fascist system of the Empire. And as long as he's comfortable, he doesn't really care about anyone else other than himself. Hey there, it's JohnBerry555, and today I'm reviewing the 10th episode of Star Wars Andor. That episode being One Way Out. So, what happens in this episode? Well, the expected prison break finally happens, but we're going to wait on that and talk about the two other storylines that we are getting in this episode first. So, I want to begin with Mom Monster's story arc in this episode, which is just one episode where she meets that banker that she calls a thug. Basically, the idea needs to help cover up the paper trail with the charity that she's using as a cover to fund the rebellion. So they need to, cover that up somehow. And essentially, he's willing to offer his services, his money laundering services, if you will, in exchange for one thing, not a percentage of that, which seemed like Mom Monster was willing to do, but rather an introduction between his teenage son and Mom Monster's teenage daughter. And Mom Monster shuts him down at that, but he says that she is thinking about it. Now, could that be him, trying to replant that idea and keep that idea in Mom Monster's head? It's a possibility. And depending, it could go either way. But yeah, we just have to wait and see. But I think she may have to agree to that, especially with the change in customs of arranged marriages. He's only offering an introduction, but yeah, I have a feeling he's going to change the terms. Just because I just got that feeling he's going to change the terms later on. But we just gotta wait and see on that. So that's what's going on there. Not too much is revealed, just more of the political intrigue stuff. But then we have a little bit with the ISB and Lucen. Yes, kind of connected because, okay, so the ISB, they're trying to figure out the Rebel Alliance and access who we know it to be Lucen. Well, they did get a lead on one Rebel cell and they're planning a trap for them. And Lucen knows that because there is a mole in the ISB. I forget his name. I literally just had it in my head and I totally blinked on it. But anyhow, it's one of the other supervisors in the ISB is the mole. So he meets with Lucen and tells him, hey, they know about this. They're looking for access. And it kind of suddenly implies that access is Lucen and all that. Pretty much, the rebels have basically a high-ranking spy in the ISB. Pretty impressive. But we also find out that he wants out of both the rebels and the ISB. But Lucen basically, suddenly provides some threats to keep him there, basically with his family. And that's very much within Lucen's character because he also describes the way he's given up for the rebellion, which is basically his soul. Basically, any of his morals are that. Basically, he's given up all that for the rebellion. And he also then mentioned how the ISB wouldn't let him go either, so he's stuck. And that's kind of probably a very sad thing. You can have people wanting out of one or both systems, but they're not going to ever get out because the systems have them trapped. And speaking of systems having them trapped, well, that's where it comes into Cassian in the prison. So the awaited prison break finally happens. And the prisoners use anything at their disposal for it. So it begins with, with Cassian in his cell area. And they start, so they because of, with the old man who died the previous shift, they knew they were going to get a new man, and that's their opportunity to do so. So they take it. Once, Andy Serkis' character, Kimo, is finally convinced. Takes a little bit, but he is convinced. And so we figure out what Cassian was doing in the bathroom. He was basically trying to burst the water pipe so that way when the Imperials try to electrify the flow, it's going to short circuit, which does happen. Of course, unfortunately, during the escape, many prisoners do die, but many prisoners also at least get out of the prison. They take the guards' weapons, and there's this one beautiful scene. I don't know if I would call it beautiful, but poetic. And this really shows how the guards never really had any power without the technology. Now that basically the prisoners are fully in riot mode and taking over the prison, they lock themselves in a room, hiding in fear, because they can't face the prisoners. Like, some of them did try, but they were all pretty much gunned down. Granted, some prisoners also unfortunately got gunned down as well. But Cassian and Andy Serkis' character Kino, they make it up to the control room where they shoot there were 3 people in there, and we figure out that they use a voice modulator for the announcements, but that's minor. But what's interesting in all this is that the word I'm looking for is they do shoot one of the 3 in that room, but the other 2, they didn't shoot. Sure, they had to threaten. They shoot one to emphasize what's going on, but basically they get the Imperials to shut the power to the entire site. So only the emergency power is operating, which is enough for lights and doors, pretty much. But when Cassian and Kino leave, they don't shoot them. I honestly expected Cassian to do that, given what he did at the start of Road 1 with that one rebel spy who was injured. Why would he risk leaving those Imperials behind? Because they could, who knows what they could do, contact the Empire? Like, why did he do that? Maybe it's showing that, he has not fully lost himself yet, for lack of a better term, that there's still parts, but then again, like, why did he choose that? Maybe it's because they cooperate and figure, maybe they'll turn around, I don't know. But I'm surprised we didn't cut nothing like that happen, because given that Andor is showing the darker sides of the rebellion, you think that would be a part of it. I guess I could be wrong in that assessment, but just a little interesting thing I took note of. But yeah, they basically take over the prison and then they start escaping. So to escape though, they have to jump out of the prison into the ocean and swim to shore. But we found out that Andy Serkis' character, Kino, he can't swim, so he won't be able to enjoy the fruits of the liberty that he helped all the other prisoners to get. Which is kind of tragic, sad really. He doesn't get to enjoy that. Now maybe off screen some other prisoner helped him to show as possible, but we'll only show 2 successful escapes. Andor and then Melshi, who's in Rogue One. So once he was identified 2 episodes ago, we knew he was going to survive. But they were just reinforcing that these are the 2 characters that we know survive. So the only 2 that are shown to survive are the ones we know to survive, which is a very neat way of addressing the fact that this show is a prequel. Because with prequels, you often have an idea how it's going to go. So they just show us what we know and leave it up there on everyone else. Besides the character that we saw die during the escape, we don't know if any of the other prisoners made it out or not. We don't know. And while like thousands of them were escaping, we just don't know what happened. But that does kind of remind me of in The Great Escape during World War II, where a bunch of prisoners, Allied prisoners held by Germany, escaped from Stalag Luft 3. Actually, probably in German should be Stalag Luft 3, if I got my number right. But anyhow, they escaped from there, and only 3 prisoners make it back to Allied lines. Something like about, I want to say like, a little over 70 escaped. and all but 3 were recaptured, and of those who were captured, 50 of them were executed. This is probably the biggest escape we've seen so far in Star Wars. So that's why I'm drawing that parallel. But it does make me think, how many of the men who escaped will the Empire just execute right away? Will they even keep any of them alive and send them back to prison? And how many have actually escaped? Because this is proportionally much bigger. But the fact that we've only showed 2, that harkens a little bit back to that escape during World War II. But also, like I said earlier, it shows how, in being a prequel, they only showed us what we know is going to happen. They're leaving everything else up in the air, which I think is actually quite genius because we know what's going to happen, so we follow that. Everything else is up in the air. Future story material, very interesting. And I really hope they explore some of the other characters from the prison that escaped, like who else survived, who else successfully escaped. But I really do like how they showed that to us, that they showed us only those we know escaping. So, could Cassian and Melshi be the only 2 that survived? It's possible. Or could they just be 2 of many? And that's what I love about how they left it ambiguous. We see the prisoners getting the freedom, but we don't see how, we only see the 2 that we know make it much further in the timeline. And that is just beautiful. It's a very unique way of addressing the prequel. Like, yeah, we're just going to focus on what we know. That's always the case with a prequel. But, let's be real, people like having twists and turns, but having the twists and turns shown off screen now, like, imply that a bunch of them escape. Some of them make it, some of them don't. That is just a brilliant move, in my opinion. It's using the nature of being a prequel to its advantage. But I think that's the main thing I have to say about this episode. Actually, I do think the new guy who was brought in during this episode, I think he makes it 2. At least out of the prison. Who knows if he makes it farther, but that's just something interesting to know. But yeah. Hey there, it's John Berry 555, and welcome to my review of Star Wars Andor Season 1, Episode 11, Daughter of Ferrix. So this is the second to last episode, so they're getting us ready for the grand finale, wherever that may be. And by all that, we gotta get all the characters to Ferrix. We gotta get Lucien there, we gotta get Cassian there, Vel, Dedra, Cyril, and yeah, those are probably the main ones that we want to get there, because, you know, certain ones like Celta is already there and a few others. I don't think Mon Mothma will go to Ferrix at all, because that would not make sense with her story. She's the political intrigue part. She's dealing with the politics of the things, not with the, the boots on the ground aspect. She's fighting the Empire politically. She's not in the trenches. That's all the other characters we're dealing with. Mon Mothma, what she's doing is separate from all that, but still very connected. But we also got to factor in with what's going on with Mon Mothma's story is that she's the one who's making it possible for them all to be able to fight the Empire. She's the one who's making speeches trying to prevent the Empire from being too overhand. She's the one who's also helping to provide funding. That's why she's important to the story, because, well, granted, Cassian, his story has not really intersected with her story yet, but it's Lucien's story that's connecting them together, because Lucien is essentially forming the Rebel Alliance, but not as an alliance, more as just a bunch of interconnected cells of the rebellion that may or may not be friends with each other, and may or may not want to fight each other. But Mon Mothma, she's the one who's going to, I think, actually bring those cells together. Because she's doing something very different than Lucien is. Lucien, he's cloak and dagger. He's the one who's fighting in the shadows. Mon Mothma, it's clear that she wants to fight in the open, but she knows that she can't because of the Empire. But she's still doing what she can, kind of in the open. Essentially presenting herself as a nuisance to the Empire, but not necessarily a deadly nuisance. All the while, she's like, here's some money, rebels, here's some money. And that's like what she's doing. But that has gotten her into trouble. And that brings us to what we see of her story in this episode. And it's not much, but her and her cousin Vel are talking. And Mon Mothma is just pretty much putting it on the table that how much potential trouble she could be if the Empire discovers basically that she's been using her accounts to fund rebels and not actual charity and all that. And kind of alludes to the fact that she does have a way out, but something that she doesn't want to do. And surprising that her husband Perrin is not willing to do it, and that's an arranged marriage for their daughter. But I do kind of like how once it's like basically asking like Zero asks Mom Monster like she's doing this, and Mom Monster says yeah, it's one of the few things she's on time for, which is kind of interesting. But that probably means Mom Monster's daughter's rebelling against Mom Monster by putting herself more into traditional Changeling culture, which is kind of weird, but does in some ways make some sense. Kids love to rebel against their parents. It's a very common thing. So it does make sense that if she's rebelling against her mother, well, she sees her mother as kind of distancing herself from many traditional Changeling cultural aspects, so maybe she's just going to go do more of it herself. But one kind of interesting thing is Mom Monster does drop the line that to Val that surprising on this issue, Perrin is quite progressive, quite basically in agreement for that. Their daughter doesn't have to follow the traditional cultures of Changeling and all that, which I do find very interesting. Kind of shows that, okay, maybe he's an out-of-touch person who's really just, he's a socialite. He's not in there for politics. He's not there for wealth or glory. He's there just to party. He's a socialite. That's all he is. Despite all of his problems, how he's not really a supportive husband, how he's kind of very dismissive of all Mom's work, and how he's, not really, he's turning a blind eye to all the problems of the Empire. That doesn't necessarily mean he is totally beyond saving, for lack of a better term. Don't think that's going to happen there, but it's kind of nice little subtlety right there. But, should really get back to Cassian's story. And we find out at the start of this episode that Cassian's mother has passed away. I know many people are expecting her death to be at the hands of the Empire rather than old age, but it kind of does make sense that it's old age. I mean, we don't get to see that a lot in Star Wars of a character dying of old age. It's normally because the Empire killed them or something like that. But this does make sense. It does show that this this important character to many people on Ferrix and to Cassian is no longer in the picture, but not necessarily because the Empire did anything. But the Empire has not done really anything to her because they want her as bait to get Cassian. Well, that's obviously going to happen now that Cassian knows, because he does eventually, him and Melshi get off Narkina 5, they get some help from some locals after the locals kind of mess with them a little bit. I think more so just to confirm that they're actually escaped prisoners and not Imperials testing their loyalty. That's the impression I got from that. But they help them get off. They go back to the beach planet where Cassian gets his stuff, including the young kid from the Dari heist, his journal and all that. And they agree to part ways. Now, Andor, Cassian, he doesn't tell Melshi that his mother died. So I wouldn't be surprised if Melshi picked up that despite Cassian said everything was okay, that not everything's actually okay. And he gives a good reason for them to separate and go to separate ways. They don't know if anyone else got off the prison planet. And I'm liking that they're keeping that unconfirmed, that we only confirm that these two get off the planet, the two that are in Rogue One. That's all we know for sure. But I'm liking that they are, the characters, Cassian and Melshi, are acting under the assumption that nobody else got out. And since nobody else got out, we must split up so that way we can make sure we share what has happened, what the Empire is doing. And by splitting up, they increase their chances. That does make sense. But that also means that Melshi won't be there on Ferrix. But I think that's poignant. That's purposeful. Because his story is about the rebellion. It's not Cassian's story of becoming a rebel. Melshi's story is tied with Cassian's, but it's not Cassian's story. He's for the past couple episodes, he's been there as a supporting character, helping Cassian along. But for finishing up Cassian's story that turns him into the rebel that we see in Rogue One, Melshi doesn't need to be there at this moment for it. So he can go and make contact with the rebels. He can go and share the story, while Cassian is out there going to Ferrix, going to his mother's funeral, and bringing the trap that ISB obviously has planned. And also that Lucen has planned as well. That's going to be very interesting. But it's already interesting because both Cinta and the ISB agent who's undercover on Ferrix, just to keep an eye on things, I think they both get temporary jobs at the same location. and looks like they both don't know that they're spies. So I think I might realize he's an Imperial spy, but not the other way around. But like, it's like, did they get chopped at the same place for undercover work? It's kind of hilarious. The same kind of like cafe or something like that by the looks of things. But that's just kind of they're both watching the same thing. They're both keeping an eye out for the same person. Both are wanting to get the same person, but they don't realize it. Of course, I have a feeling when everything comes down, like Vel, she'll stop Cinta and the ISB. Because I'm getting the impression that Vel, she's wanting to go more the Mon Monster style of rebellion. Less cloak and dagger. No, not the cloak and dagger, but less secrecy, less she is less impartiality. Because Lucen, he's willing to sacrifice Andor Kriego so that way he stays safe. And he convinces Saul through cloak and dagger and deception not to go help Anton Kriego, so that way Saul doesn't get captured and reveal Lucen. Lucen's all about preserving himself. So he's fully willing of cutting it, so that way he stays safe. But he's obviously going to go to Ferrix as well, even though he was warned not to by his assistant, because of how many people are going to be there. But he's going to go there, and Ferrix is going to go there. It's all going to come to head, and everyone's going to get caught. Pretty much is what I'm expecting to happen. And I think doing all this will help shape what the role is going to be. Is it going to be what Mon Mothma wants, an organization standing for the return to decency and democracy, or is it going to be Lucen who's willing to fight the Empire regardless of the cost, much like Saul? We're seeing Saul's paranoia here, and that's in contrast to, in a way, Lucen's paranormal. Saul's paranormal is more of an unhinged paranormal that could cause him to act rashly, if you will. That's what his paranormal is doing to him. But Lucen, his paranormal getting caught means he's willing to sacrifice anybody to stay safe. He'll sound sane when he's saying that. He'll sound like, we can't like he's literally said, I can't risk my ISB plant. No, you can't. That's not why you don't want Saul to help. You don't want Saul to help because Saul knows you and could lead the Empire to you. That's why you don't want to sacrifice him at this stage. You don't want him to get captured. Now, if that was the sure thing for him, then you probably would be a little different tune. And he didn't want to make the decision about Anti-Kriega, so he convinced Saul to make the decision the way he wanted it. Really, Lucen, he's not coming out of the next episode. That is my prediction right there. In fact, I have a feeling a lot of characters, except for Cassian, will not be coming out of episode 12. But we just got to wait to see on that. I hope you did enjoy this review. I know I talked a lot about it, and there's one thing I really need to talk about before I finish it off, and that's with the droid B6? No, that's not, I can't remember his name, but essentially, like, he's depressed that Cassian's adopted mother, Marva, is dead. And you can tell at the beginning, he didn't quite understand, like, they literally said, I'll wait for Marva to return, when that's not really a possibility. But, like, how everyone in Ferrix is treating him respectfully, you know? And there's one scene where, the person who Cassian got to help create a cover story for him, and all the way back in episode 1, after one of his shifts, he agrees to spend the night there, so that way the droid, whose name I forgot, won't be alone. Let's be real, droids in Star Wars have always been alive. The writers, when we see, have always treated droids as sentient beings. Well, not always, no, the nameless ones are one, but the main droids have always been treated that way by the writers. And our main heroes have always treated droids well. The worst, I think, a main character who was supposed to like has treated droid has been more like how they would treat a pet. That's still pretty good, because that's real. Some humans treat pets better than they do other humans, so that's just something to keep in mind. But even still, we don't often get too often where any of our main characters are treating droids as people, as their own persons, even amongst the main characters. We do get that a lot where they're treating them like pets very well. In many cases, pretty much like people, especially among our main characters, our heroes. But let's be real, we don't see side characters doing that. We don't even see our main characters do that with one-off droids. Sure, Luke gives R2 lots of well treatment and treats R2 pretty much like a person, same thing with Anakin. But that random bandroid that attacked them, no, they don't. That doesn't get the same consideration. Now, how would the people of Ferrix respond to an unknown droid as well? I don't know. But in this scenario with this droid, they acknowledge his personhood, and that's pretty profound. And that's something Star Wars needs to do a lot more exploration. We got a little bit of a solo in the connecting materials because of L3, but there's still a lot more that they could explore with that, and I do hope we get to that point of exploring that. Hey there, it's JohnBerry555, and welcome to my review of the season finale of Star Wars Andor, that being episode 12, Rix Road. So, like many of us were expecting, everything comes back to Ferrix. We see Marvel's funeral, and that's actually where I really want to start my review with that. There's other things that go on before and after it, but that's where I want to start. The Empire basically, because they want to lure Cassian, did allow the funeral, but they were putting a lot of restrictions on it, and just to kind of make it easier, I guess, for that. But I'm oh, we were going to allow 30. They're asking for, okay, you can have 40. You want it at this time? No, can you have it at this time? That kind of stuff, kind of more mild annoyances rather than anything to actually stop the funeral from occurring. Because the Empire wants Marvel's funeral to occur so that way Cassian is lured back to Ferrix. Well, obviously Cassian does come back and the funeral goes on, but it's not the way the Empire wants. And that's probably a good way of looking at everything that happens in this episode. It's not what the Empire wants. They're not getting what they're actually after. They might get in some cases what they think they want, but they're not actually getting it. And that we also see with Mom Monthra's storyline going on here. It's not too much, but essentially her and her husband Perrin come back from a party, and basically Mom Monthra's insinuated Perrin's gambling again because she knows her driver is an ISB spy, or strongly suspects. So that way the Empire was looking at the troublesomeness of her accounts, were oh, it's just she's trying to cover for her husband's gambling rather than actually funding the rebellion. So kind of throwing her own husband under the bus. But the thing is, the Empire thinks they got what they wanted there, but they didn't. Because if they were really getting what they needed or wanted, they would actually discover that Mom Monthra was funding the rebellion. But they did not discover that because she didn't give it to them. She gave them basically a false lead, a wild goose chase. And of course, just going on with Mom Monthra, it does seem like she's going through with setting up an arranged marriage according to Chandrilan customs for her daughter with that one basically money launderer to help cover up her finances. But as we saw in the last episode, at this point, Mom Monthra's daughter Lida may not necessarily be opposed to it, but you can definitely tell that Mom Monthra is not happy about it. So that does put a unique spin on it that I don't think we initially were expecting when we first got it. But that's just a little side note, kind of showing what's going on on the political intrigue side. But going back to Ferrix, Cassian returns, he talks with his friends and all that, and basically he decides he's going to rescue Bix from the ISB, and they're holding her in one of the hotels on Ferrix that they turn into the headquarters. And he does that during Marvel's funeral. But before all that, he talks with his friend, I forget his name, but the guy who helped cover for him all the way back in episode 1, who also helped take care of Marvel, who stayed the night with B after Marvel's death. That guy, I can't remember his name. But essentially, he relays to Cassian some of the final things that Marvel said, which really was impactful for Cassian. That on top of right before all this goes down, Cassian is listening to what's the kid from Aldhani. Why do these names slip my mind? But anyhow, Andor is listening to the manifesto, which essentially talks about how even the smallest spark of rebellion can be as simple as just essentially not bending down to the sword. You're doing small little stuff, and then that connects it up with the funeral and Marvel's speech, because she obviously recorded basically a last speech which be plays to everyone on Ferrix before, well, the event goes down, as I'm calling it, before a riot breaks out. All because the Empire could not stand what Marvel was saying, knowing that would basically inspire the people of Ferrix to rebel, which does occur. A riot breaks out, all because one Imperial officer tries to basically stop the hologram recording from being played. And it keeps on going down for the Empire from there. It's not great for the people of Ferrix at all. They die, they get injured, all that, but that's what occurs. Starts as a simple riot, and then one of them throws a bomb. Specifically, a kid, not necessarily a kid, he's probably more like a young adult or older teenager, probably around there. But his father was hanged by the Empire only a couple of episodes ago, and so he's doing the same thing Cassian did when Cassian's adopted father Clem was hanged by clone troopers. The exact same thing, but this time he has a support network that Cassian didn't have during this event. And that essentially turns what starts as probably a simple riot into a full-blown, I'm going to say it turned basically into a street revolt. And it goes out to hand for the Empire. One of the Imperial officers panics and orders the stormtroopers to open fire, who at this point hadn't been doing anything. They were just standing there while the Imperial army troopers were facing the brunt of it. And it just goes, basically, it's a brawl in the streets. Stormtroopers are firing, people are jumping onto Imperials and trying to take them down. Sometimes they get shot, sometimes not. They're rescuing each other from the Empire, from Imperials as they're trying to be arrested. Essentially what we're seeing is basically a revolt that's going to help contribute to the forming of the rebellion. The people are fighting back against the Empire, standing up against oppression, standing up for what is right, for freedom, for liberty, for basically not being treated as others and not letting others be treated as a dangerous other that is unfounded. And that's all going on while Cassian is rescuing Bix. And of course, doing all this, we also have Lucien. He's just watching it all going on, which connects very nicely back to when he told Saw he was a coward. He's afraid to get himself dirty. He's afraid. But I do wonder if Marvel's speech might have maybe got him to rethink his stance. Maybe realize maybe he does need to put himself in more harm, allow himself to put himself in danger that could risk his own life. I don't know, but that'd be very interesting to, well, explore. And then we also see with Cyril and the ISB supervisor Jedha, though they're at this time, and she's in the crowd doing all this because she had the lead on Cassian's whereabouts, so she was trying to go find him. Well, Cassian got away, but she's stuck in the crowd as the riot starts. And she's taken down, and she's knocked down, and she only manages to get out because Cyril saved her. And again, Cyril, he's creepy as fuck, and I'm saying that. And you can tell Jedha's like, she's thankful she's alive, but she's like, why did it have to be this guy? But at the same time, we also saw that Cinta killed one of the members of her staff, so there's now an opening, and I wouldn't be surprised if Cyril would like to take it, even though I think Jedha would rather not. But again, they're both Imperials, they're both fascists. And the thing is that fascists use each other to climb the ladder. That's what's going to go on. They're going to jockey for power. There's a lot going on there, and I don't think it's going to turn out well for either of them. And not because of anything the rebellion is doing, but because of their own actions. There's a few other things going on as well during all this, because there's so much. The Time Grappler is basically doing his thing, and that's was signifying the start of this, not on the Empire schedule. More people showed up than the Empire was expecting, which causes them to panic, which led to the riot as I described to you. The Empire lost control on Ferrix. Like Cassian said during the prison arc episodes, power, let's see, what is it? Power does not panic, something like that, and the Empire panicked and they lost control because of it. Now, they'll gain control back through force, I'm sure, because it's the Empire, and it's going to be bloody, it's going to be costly, but they will try to gain back to control. The rebellion has not been formed. This is not like, no, we can even take an example for Star Wars Rebels with Rosal. They pushed off the yoke of Imperial oppression, but the thing is, they had outside help, the Rebel Alliance. Sure, the Rebel Alliance wasn't able to send a lot, but that just little bit of support, there's a few X-Wings, a few Rebel pilots that will stay behind. they had additional help besides just themselves, and they were able to sort it off. That's what was showing, I think, in the show, that as the rebels expand and become a true alliance, they're helping each other fight off the Empire. We saw in the Andor Kriegers, his attack is destroyed, but that's because of Lucen's fear of being coward, now willing to sacrifice Krieger and his forces so that way his more ISP is undiscovered. He's willing to do that, but it's not in the proper alliance. That's, I think, what Mon Mothma's part role in the forming the Rebel Alliance is going to be, making an actual alliance where rebels help each other to defeat the Empire. I think that's what we're going to see in Season 2. The Empire is going to slam its boot on Ferrix after this. Maybe they'll rise up again, maybe they won't. But unfortunately, I think it's going to fail because the Empire is going to come back and force and use violence to enforce their will and their power. And that's going to, I think, contrast to what we see later on in the timeline where the Rebel Alliance are helping each other throw off the Empire and succeeding at doing it. The Rebels are there, but the Alliance is not. And I think that is where I'm going to end the episode besides 2 final points, or I should say my review. 1. Cassian presents himself to Lucen and basically says, I'm in. And that's what the show has been building up to. Cassian making the choice to become a rebel. Not just to be someone who's against the Empire and is willing to steal from them and fight them on occasion, but to someone who's actively choosing to fight the Empire. Not because the Empire is impacting him personally, even though they have, but because the Empire is trying to oppress everyone and they need to be stopped. This can actually be nicely illustrated with before Cassian presents himself to Lucen, he makes sure that Bix, his friend, whose name I forgot, and the kid who threw that bomb, he makes sure that they get off plan before he does that. He's helping them escape. He's helping them not for his benefit, but for their benefit. This actually does contrast when Cyril saving Dedra. He did not do it to save Dedra. He did it for himself because he saw that was an opportunity to endear himself to Jedha, to make an inroad with the ISB, to essentially to continue to hunt Cassian, to seek, for that better, his power back, because that's what he wants. That is very different. He's a follower to Cassian very much because of this. Cassian helps his friends because it's the right thing to do, because they need help. Cyril helps Dedra, not to help Dedra, but to help himself. His selfish need to climb the ladder, to not be on the bottom of the fascist system. Rather than fighting the system that pushing him down, he thinks he has to climb up the system. Just a little contrast there. And then the very last thing is the post-credit scene. So apparently, I was wrong. They were building a part for the Death Star. Yeah, the post-credit scene shows the Death Star super laser in its assemblage stage. And what it seems to be doing is the parts they were building in the prison are being used as joints for sections of the Death Star's super laser dish. Now, probably nothing right, not necessarily, it's not like, a main reactor or something in the actual super laser itself, but something just a component in it. A component that they need thousands, millions of. But I also wouldn't be surprised if the Death Star is not the only place this component is used. I have a feeling that this component is used in a lot of other parts of the Imperial war machine. It's just that these components were specifically earmarked to the Death Star. I was a big fan of the theory that just a generic component for the Imperial war machine. And guess what? The Death Star still needs those generic components. Now, maybe this component is unique to the Death Star, but maybe it's not. And I like that is open-ended. And I do kind of like the idea that, Cassian, there is some symmetry, some poetic rhyming that Cassian was building parts when he was in prison that would lead to his own death. There is some kind of poetic irony in all that. But still, I still would like to learn that these parts are just used for the Death Star, used for other things, because I think that would be even more impactful, that the Empire is using prisoners, people who showed the tiniest bit of disrespect to the Empire, to build the war machine that oppresses the galaxy. Because I feel like that would be even more tragic. Not just the Death Star, but everything. But that's just my thoughts and my wishes about those parts. Obviously, I'm probably going to be wrong, but I would love that because I feel like that would say a lot more about the systems of the Empire. So that concludes my thoughts on Star Wars Andor Season 1. A few final things I would like to say is, this is probably one of the best Star Wars shows ever. I mean, I've enjoyed nearly all of them that's come out. You know, the Clone Wars. Yes, the 2D micro-series is phenomenal. I really should do a video on that itself. But those two series, Rebels is good, Resistance is good. I've liked The Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, and Kenobi. I've liked Obi-Wan Kenobi. I've liked all of them. I even like Ewoks and Droids, believe it or not. Now, granted, I will admit, some of them are stronger than others, and in many ways, Andor is the strongest Star Wars television show that we've ever gotten. I would say the second strongest is probably the Clone Wars, but man, Andor has really set a new standard of what Star Wars shows can achieve. And I do hope future shows will live up to these expectations. And the expectations, I'm talking about what the show is saying. Andor said what I wanted to say without relying on things like cameos or things like Easter eggs. And some people are saying that's what makes Andor good. That is not what makes Andor good. What makes Andor good is the fact that this is a character-driven story that has something to say. And that's really what it boils down to. This show knew what it wanted to say, and it said it. And it said it in a compelling way using good character development and character storytelling. Other Star Wars shows have done that as well, but Andor has really perfected it and has set a new standard what you expect from character-driven storytelling in Star Wars. That, I think, is what's going to be the major impact of Star Wars Andor. We kind of saw kind of glimpses of this character-driven stories in both Kenobi and in Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian, but not to the same extent. I have a feeling Season 3 of The Mandalorian may be taking some cues from Andor, not based off of necessarily the public's reaction to it, but maybe based off of internal Lucasfilm reaction to it. I have a feeling this is definitely going to hopefully allow Lucasfilm to reapproach how they're approaching the series and to make them even better than they already are. Because, let's be real, I've not yet watched a bad Star Wars series, let alone Star Wars movie. Even my least favorite Star Wars movie, Attack of the Clones, is still a pretty good film. Even the holiday special has redeeming qualities about it. And that's a big thing about Star Wars. There's always something good. Whether it's great in its absurdity or its campiness or all that, or is it's emotional and storytelling. You get the gambit with Star Wars, and generally all of it's good. But some of the most meaningful stuff is normally the stuff that has something to say, knows how to say it, and does it with compelling characters, just as Star Wars Andor has done. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2. This is the final season of Andor Season 2, and it perfectly, in my opinion, connects the story of Andor Season 1 to the story of Rogue One and making sure everything goes together. We're going to talk about each individual episode, and then we're going to talk about them in groups, and then we're going to talk about the season as a whole. Timestamps are down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and I just finished watching the first episode of Star Wars Andor Season 2 1 year later, because this episode takes place 1 year later from when Season 1 ended. So, to keep things brief and spoiler-free real quick, I thought the episode was really good. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, exciting. Whatever term you want to use, I think it was a good way to begin the season. Also, a lot of the stuff we saw in the promotional material did appear in this episode. Now, at the time of recording, I have not yet watched episodes 2 and 3, which I will be doing right after I finish recording. So, to give you guys a recap, the episode actually opens up with Andor stealing the tie. This is one of the big things we saw in the promotional material. He has his contact at Sign-Off Systems, who definitely, she's a bit nervous about this, but seems like she's doing pretty well. I hope everything good happens to her. Don't know for sure if we see her later on in the show or not. He eventually does get to the point where he's supposed to meet a fellow rebel, and they're supposed to go take the tie someplace else. But he gets there, and yeah, that person's not there, and there's a bunch of, well, not the brightest bunch of rebels. Apparently, they're connected with what's a brigade led by a character named Maya, and apparently is a mutiny. Yeah, the episode ends and they're fighting, and they are fighting about whatever's going on. And Cassian's stuck in the middle of it, trying to, do his own job. Meanwhile, Masma's, well, her daughter's getting married. We knew that from season 1, and now the wedding's actually going to be going on, and apparently it's going to be, a pretty big wedding going on. All that Lucenzel, yes, Lucenzel, who Mama was not expecting, but apparently Lucen knows the person that so the father of the groom. Apparently Lucen knows that person. And also, during the conversations, during the partying, Lucen's clearly fishing for information. It's like, come on, you're a flight cadet or something, and here's this guy asking you about who you are, where you're training, and who you're training with, and where you're going to be going. Operational security is apparently not a thing in the Empire, unless you're among Director Krennic's group, because they're planning to do something to Ghorman in order to get a mineral extracted that could destroy this planet, but they need to make the Ghormans look bad so they can justify it all, especially in case the planet destabilizes and go boom by accident. And apparently there's operational security there. Helps threatening people by saying, hey, if you spill bean of what's happening here, I'm going to tell the Emperor. Apparently that's enough to keep a lot of people quiet. But that's pretty much what goes on in the episode. I thought it was fun and exciting. I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below, and I'll see you for episode 2. Welcome to the Jedha Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and welcome to my review of the second episode of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Sagroma Teema, which, just for context, and as we discover in the episode, that is a greeting on Chandrila, Mon Mothma's home world. I'm not sure if it's related specifically to marriage, or it can be used in other contexts as well. But speaking of all that, there's more of that going on. There's more things going on. Apparently, Leia has the first fight with her betrothed, but then during one of the ceremonies, apparently there's a lot of traditions involved, but apparently Perrin gives a speech and just basically, hey, trouble will occur. You just gotta find a way to work beyond that. So, hey, he's actually stepping up a little bit as a father. And then, of course, there's everything going on with Mon Mothma and Take-Homa. Seems like things are not going to be going good there. Lucen seems to be catching on about things going on there. Yeah, lot of complicated intrigue stuff. And to finish talking about it, I think I gotta wait for episode 3. But before we talk about episode 3, which is going to be my next short, so stay tuned for that, we need to talk about what's going on first with Andor, because he's stuck on this world waiting, and basically he's somewhat babysitting these disorganized rebels. Yeah, not going on too well, but eventually he takes a opportunity when they're fighting each other, because yeah, they're just not getting along very well, and he takes off, and we see what planet he's on. Huge spoilers, it's Yavin 4. I did not expect to see that. I'm going to assume this is before the Masasi group was founded. That's just my best guess. But yeah, I can't believe that they actually chose Yavin 4 to be this plan. But it makes sense that a relatively uninhabited planet would be used by the rebels for both meeting places and as a future base. So that's going on there. And then I forgot to talk about this with episode 1, but with Bix, Brasso, B2, they're on the planet, I forget the name, but it's a farming community and they're working as mechanics, keeping things fixed. Well, anyhow, Imperial inspection time, and they're concerned because they're technically not there legally, and they have to deal with that. And oh yeah, by the way, the Imperial Lieutenant is hitting on Bix, and she's not happy about it, which makes sense. She was tortured by the Empire, and I've seen it in the previous episode. She has some lingering trauma about that, and Tony Gilroy definitely made the choice to frame that trauma as one of assault. Not just like physical assault, but emotional, mental abuse, and sexual assault. That's definitely how he chose to frame it, which makes sense. Severe torture will exhibit, I would assume. I've never been tortured, but definitely creative. So let me know your thoughts on episode 2 in the comment section down below, and stay tuned for episode 3. Welcome to the Jedha Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Episode 3, Harvest. So a lot happens in this episode. We of course got Mon Mothma's daughter, her wedding finishes up, and Mon Mothma actually lets loose at the party a little bit, dancing and all that. Probably does need it. Probably does, but doing all that because Lucian's finding out everything about Mamasa's financial difficulties and Takeoma's involvement, and whatever's going on with Takoma is probably not going to be good for Mamasma. Well, apparently he gets Cinta to show up. Finally, Vel gets to see Cinta, but she knows Cinta's there because Lucian brought her here because, yeah, Takoma, he's not getting out of that speeder alive. I'm positive of that. So yeah, so that's happening. Meanwhile, during all of this, I have not even talked about the plot point in the previous 2 episodes going on with Cyril Khan and Dedra Moa. Apparently, they're living in the same apartment and Dedra's meeting Cyril's mother. But she does put Cyril's mother in her place, so that's something. But still, I have a feeling they're both using each other. I don't know why. I'm going to talk about that hopefully when I get into my full review, but apparently that's going on, and might actually be good for Cyril somehow. Who knows what's going on there, but we also got the big thing with Cassian. He does finally get in contact with somebody, and Lucian's assistant, but he finds out that the plan that Bix and Brasso and B2 are on is in the communication blackout, so of course instead of listening for instructions, he goes right there to rescue them because he assumes the Empire is doing something, and yeah, the Empire is doing something. Oh, and by the way, that lieutenant who was hitting on Bix, yeah, he was doing more than hitting on Bix. Tony Gilroy actually decided to call it what it was in the episode. That Imperial lieutenant tried to rape Bix. Bix successfully defended herself, though. She did not give that lieutenant an inch. And, well, he paid the price for it. Unfortunately, though, while Cassian was able to take out the Imperial troops that was, doing their patrol and likely going to arrest them all for being there illegally, if Bix didn't do, basically, if Bix under force consented, which would not be actual consent. But yeah, that's what the lieutenant was trying to do as well. Extortion, fascist scum. Or should I say imperial scum? Same difference. But unfortunately, Brasso does not make it. He is shot. Here's a chance that he might be nursed back to health. Yeah, don't think so. This I don't think it's going to be that positive. This is Andor, not Happy Fun Time Place. So yeah, but overall, very good episode. Can't wait till I can talk about all 3 of these episodes together, but we're going to have to wait for that. But in the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and of course, may the Force be with you, always. Welcome to the Jedha Ranger, I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of the first 3 episodes of Star Wars Andor Season 2. Episode 1 is 1 year later, because it takes place 1 year later. Kind of obvious when you think about it. Episode 2 is Sagroma Teema, which is a Chandrilan greeting that's at least associated with weddings, as we see with Mama's daughter actually getting married. And then episode 3 is Harvest, and well, looks like the Empire is coming to collect. But that's all to say that there's a lot to talk about. These 3 episodes were great. I thought they were fun. There's basically 4 plot lines going on, and 2 of the 4 do come together at the end of episode 3 Harvest, or during episode 3 Harvest, I should say. And of course, there is a little bit of connection too with one of the other plot lines. But let's just talk about it in each of the 3 plot lines as they go. I will be mixing episodes, of course, and spoilers abound. So let's focus on Cassian Andor first. His plot line goes, well, and starts, I should say, at Sign-On Fleet Systems because he's stealing a prototype TIE. He has a contact in the inside who's nervous about that, but he says that's good because it keeps you alert. And yeah, I think that does actually make sense. You're nervous, you're alert, you are aware of what's going on, and you may actually do something about it. It keeps you from getting complacent, if you will. But anyhow, the stealing the TIE, though, it's a prototype. It does not go without a hitch. One, Andor doesn't know how to fly the TIE because it's so different than every other thing. It's a good thing that I think that Andor's stealing it because I don't think the Empire needs another advanced TIE. And apparently he looks like he's chased by some TIE advances, specifically the V1, which is not Darth Vader's TIE, which is a TIE Advance X1. No, this is the Grand Inquisitor, and a few other characters got to pilot it in the Star Wars Rebels. Slightly different advanced TIE, but that's just what it looked like to me. But that was great. Andor kept on crashing, but not crashing. He does get away. He goes to his contact point, but his contact is dead because apparently another rebel cell accidentally mooned themselves or crash landed on that planet and killed him because he was not friendly to them. Yeah, I think they're called the Maya Brigade, but that group of these, I think, is the least intelligent. Yeah, Yeah, they're not the brightest rebels in the bunch, and Andor's probably like, why did I have to deal with these? And yeah, Andor's captured because he's in a time of Imperial test pilot uniform, so of course he's an Imperial, even though they're not listening to him. But he does get away, and we discover that the plane was Yavin 4, which is cool. I can't believe they actually did that, because Tony Gilroy, well, yes, he knew Season 2 was going to connect more into Rogue One and all that, but was not big on doing no Easter eggs for the sake of Easter eggs. But it does kind of make sense that what would become the rebel base for Massassi Group, and thus and later the bigger rebel alliance, would the mission probably get started as a place where rebels will rendezvous and meet up to exchange information, supplies, etc. That actually does make some sense. And then he goes flying away, leaving them to fight each other and the beasts on Yavin, and he gets in contact with Lucin's assistant, and he discovers that the plane that Bix, Brasso, B2, and I forget where I think are on is in a communication blackout. And before I talk about what happens next, we gotta talk about what's actually going on in the plant. So they're basically Bix, Brasso, Cassian when he's there, where they're all working as mechanics. They're technically there illegally, so they're illegal immigrants because they don't have a valid visa. But you know what? They're helping out, and they're also laying low and all that. And it seems like some members of the community are aware of their status and are trying to help them hide. The one's definitely doing more than the other, who may or may not have ratted them out to the Empire. I'm not quite sure. But doing all that, we've seen some nice community. B2 has made friends with other droids and all that. And they actually have a picture of Marvel and Andor right next to their communications. I thought that was just so great, a nice callback, a reminder, if you will. And well, eventually the Empire does come up for an inspection. That's kind of given away because I mentioned that the Empire has a communication blackout on that planet, and that's apparently standard procedure during these inspections, all that, making sure visas in order, that quotas are being met, all that jazz. Well, one of the lieutenants, the lieutenant in charge of this, apparently catches, no, his eye catches Bix and decides to flirt with her. She's not happy about it. I don't know if she and Cassian are married or not, but she's definitely at least saying that to try to get that imp off her back. Yeah, it doesn't work because later on when they actually arrive for their formal inspection, he goes to where Bix is living alone and tries to R-word her, rape her. Yes. Tony Gilroy went that far, and I think the scene was well done, but it was very hard to watch. But this is probably, and Tony Gilroy actually had it called out for what it is in the episode, using the word, which I'm just so impressed, and I applaud him for that, because that does take some guts. Because if you know the internet, the fact that I actually said the word in this review means this video probably will not be monetized, which is sad. But that's the way the internet goes at times. But I gotta give Bix this. She defended herself and did not give that imperial scum, that fascist scum, an inch. She did not. She defended herself and took him out. And then she also took out the driver too. Will tried his best too, but she got better aim. And then that's when Cassian arrives. He uses the tiny stone to eliminate the Imperial Zero, but unfortunately not before Brasso is shot. He was hoping that Brasso might be able to get Nurse back to help, because he definitely seemed to have gotten close to one of the members on that planet, and it seems like they might have been kindling a relations. So there's that. So maybe, but no, probably not. This is Star Wars Andor, not Star Wars Happy Fun Time Place where everything goes right. That's not that show. I would like it to be. I want everything to have a happy ending, but we gotta be realistic about the time frame and everything that happens. Andor eventually dies as well, so spoilers, I guess. But anyhow, all of that. And then they evacuate the plane, leaving B2 behind. Why did you leave B2 behind? But B2 is in the kill of that character, I forget her name, but that Brasso was close with. So, at the very least, B2 is safe, and hopefully B2 will come back around. Please. Cassian and B2 need at least one scene together before the show ends, please. And that covers those two plots, but we still got the plot going on with, well, actually, we're going to wait on months. We're talking about what's going on with Sierra and Dedra, because that's not something I was expecting. First of all, Dedra's being let in on part of Project Stardust because they need a specific mineral that you can mine, that the Empire can mine on Ghorman, but they need to basically make the Ghormans look bad so they can justify mining, relocation, and all that. Apparently, they consider everything from fake natural disasters to fake, plagues and all that to try to get volunteer, blah blah blah. But Dedra's basically like, well, you can do propaganda to make them look bad as you want, but you need some actual Ghorman insurgents that you can control who can make bad decisions and do things at the wrong time, wrong place to make them look even worse. Controlled opposition. That's what Dedra's suggesting, and she's not happy with that because she still wants to track down Access, who we know is Luthen. And apparently, Dedra and Zero are living together now. Okay. I feel sorry for both of them because I think Dedra is just using Zero to track down Access, and Zero, well, I think he's more attracted to Dedra for her power than anything actually about her character. So yeah, I don't know how that's going to be healthy or not, but apparently that's going on. But apparently one good thing is, seems like Dedra put Zero's mother in her place, called her out for basically emotionally abusing her son. So there is something there. I don't understand it, but another thing too, seems like things are going good for Zero in his work, because apparently he's been promoted, and just like he was introduced to the Bureau of Standards, he's now introducing somebody else, and he's actually giving the Bureau of Standards a lot more credit, because he claims that he cracked down a fraudulent, ring of corrupt supply officers or something like that. But there's not too much going on there. We're going to have to wait to see. But Ghorman's definitely going to come up, and things are going to go crazy. But speaking of Ghorman, apparently one of the guests at Mon Monster's wedding, Luthen was talking to, who was half Ghorman, half Chinjurin. So who knows how that's going to now work into things. And Luthen, yeah, he ended up attending the wedding for Mon Monster's daughter. It's crazy. Apparently he's a friend of the groom's father and has a wedding gift, which is a rare piece of artwork that was stolen tens of millennia ago by the Rakata. Nice call out to the Rakata, but it's just kind of insane there. And also Luthen, he's being his old spy self, he's getting information from the guests, and he's picking up that Mon Monsters might have had financial difficulties and went to take Coma and all that to get things sorted out, but things are not going too well because apparently something's going on with Tacoma. So what does Luthen do? Well, he contacts Cinta, who replaces Tacoma's driver, and I don't think Tacoma's going to be walking out of that speeder alive. Correction, he's not going to be walking out of it. When he's leaving it, he's going to be limp, if you know what I mean. And that's actually when Cinta and Vel actually see each other. The only time they haven't seen each other in apparently a while. Given their line of work, that does kind of make sense. But Vel, she knows what Cinta is doing though, and probably why. Yeah, so things are not going too well on Chandrilla. Mon Mothma also tries to give her daughter an out of the wedding, and her daughter rejects it in the form of rebellion. But I wonder if Mon Mothma did that on purpose, knowing her daughter was going to rebel and then actually do it. I do wonder. But hey, I gotta give Perrin this. He gave a Father of the Bride speech, and he actually gives some pretty solid advice that there will be fights, there will be troubles. It's about working through them and finding what works and what you guys actually like. He actually made some good points in that. So yeah, lots are going on there. I still can't believe just how all that, lined up, and that the Mon Mothma part line is somewhat connected with the Cassian Andor line. That's only because Luthen's assistant returns to Coruscant, so that way she had access to her main communication stuff, so she can actually talk to people, because she can't do that on Chandrilla. Is that everything? Because I'm sure it's not, but hey, it's what I got for you, and I would love to hear so much more in the comments. There's some very interesting stuff, some great stuff. I mentioned how the Imperial officer tried to all-word Bix. Well, there's this moment where he looks at himself in the mirror, which is a callback way back in the first episode where Bix is woken up with a nightmare. Specifically, it's like the phantom of the Imperial scientist that tortured her in season 1, who the phantom also stops and looks at the mirror before approaching Bix. Very much Tony Gill has recontextualized that moment from episode 1 to become a parallel to what happens to Bix later on with the Imperial officer, but this time she's able to resist. She has the tools at her disposal, and she's able to resist and give the Imperial scum what for. something that she was not able to given the situation way back in season 1. It's tragic, mind you, but it's so good from a filmmaking and storytelling perspective. These episodes did not shy away from anything. Things that were left unstated were left that way on purpose, I'm sure. They, hits harder, like, oh yeah, we know what's going on, and all that. But also what was stated, like, Tony Gilroy did not have to have the characters outright say the R word, but he chose to. Chose to frame it as what it is, a violation, a act of imperial aggression. Imperial might be actually the right term, because Imperials in real life, Imperialists, yeah, they take what they want without consideration of everyone else. Isn't that so fitting? It's like this poetry. It rhymes or something. But anyhow, now that I got that George Lucas quote out of the way, let me know your thoughts on these 3 episodes in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedha Ranger. I'm John Berry 555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Episode 4, Ever Been to Ghorman. So like I said, this is the 4th episode of Season 2. We have a 1-year jump from the previous episodes, and there's a bit of a twist going on. In the past 3 episodes, we saw a hint of, Dedra and Ciro's domestic life. Here we get Cassian and Bix's domestic life, which is just a neat little twist while Ciro is doing some undercover spy ops, like kind of a twist on the formula going on. There's a lot going on. Mom Monster's trying to gather votes up to end the PORD in the Senate, and she's just not getting votes. Even the Senate from Ghorman, no luck, because he's afraid of making waves with the Empire because of all the pressure that the Empire and propaganda the Empire is putting on. There's just a lot of interesting stuff. Ciro is being tasked by Dedra to infiltrate the Ghorman front in order to probably so that way they can use the Ghorman front to make the Ghormans look even worse for Imperial propaganda purposes, which is already working, at least on Ciro's muzzle. So we got a little complex spidiness going on there. Lucen learns that Dedra is now working with something involving Ghorman because of Lana, his contact in the ISB, who also, by the way, seems to be trying to, he probably already has some quote-unquote friends, but maybe get some other contacts with other ISB supervisors who are frustrated, overwhelmed with everything they have to do to probably doing other spy stuff going on. Like I said, a lot of stuff going on, but the episode pretty much ends with Lucen sending Cassian to Ghorman to figure out what's going on the ground. And yeah, but a huge thing going on is the trauma that Bix suffered way back in season 1 is still present, and you can tell it's affecting her. And even Cassian, you can tell everything he has to do is also affecting him, but in a different way. In all honesty, probably one of the biggest thing about Andor so far has been all the hard realism, for that better term, raw emotions going on in it that just really just builds. And there's a lot of this episode, and the short review will not do it justice. So we're going to continue discussion in the comment section down below, and stay tuned for my review of all 3 episodes that dropped recently. So stay tuned for that. Welcome to the Jedha Ranger. I'm John Berry 555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Episode 5, I Have Friends Everywhere. So this episode continues off where the previous episode left off, obviously. The Empire Ciro, they're infiltrating the Ghorman front, trying to get them to act up. Meanwhile, Cassian and Zil, for Lucen, trying to also contact the Ghorman front, give them maybe some advice, figure out what they're about, so this can learn about. Meanwhile, Lucen has a whole issue because a piece of artwork that he gave to a, what's his name? The father of the boy who married Mama's daughter had piece bugged, and apparently another piece of artwork was fake from a different dealer, and now all the artwork is going to be taken care of, so that's stressing Lucen out. I haven't even mentioned the stuff going on with Saw, where they're stealing Rydomium thing, but not for uses as weapons of fuel or anything like that. No, for personal use. Yeah. Thor is a bit insane, and he's definitely going very much, I would say, anarchist, druggist route. It seems like the way he's going. I can see why the rest of the Rebel Alliance decide to distance themselves from him. He's a bit crazy. That's essentially the main stuff going on. all this stuff obviously has not come together yet. I'm just waiting for the Cassian's arc stories going on, and Kyber's, they're going to come together probably in an explosive fashion. I should also mention Bix is still struggling with dreams, not being able to sleep, and has resorted to some kind of sleep aid that probably won't help her in the long term. There's definitely a connection there where it seems like substance use, it seems to be a plot point that is being weaved into these episodes. How that's going to develop, I'm not so sure. Like I said, a lot of interesting stuff going on. It's going to develop, looks like it's going to be developing in a very interesting way, heading for what I'm going to assume is an explosive finale with what we all know is coming, the Ghorman massacre. Whether that's going to be the next episode or in the next set of episodes remains to be seen. But in the meantime, I want to hear your thoughts on this episode in the comment section down below, and stay tuned for when I review all 3 episodes later today. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger, I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Episode 6, What a Festive Evening. So in this episode, there's a bunch of stuff going on. We have Vel and Cinta reuniting on Ghorman to help them out with their little heist against the Empire. The heist goes on with pretty well except for one hit, because while they did tell the Ghorman front not to use any blasters, one did bring one and accident discharged it, hitting Cinta. Yeah, that was taking it better than I would have thought, especially because, they were rekindling their relationship after being apart basically for 2 years without seeing each other, thanks to Luthen. And speaking of Luthen, he's going to a party so that way he can remove a listening device on one of the artifacts he sold to someone. And during that time, a bunch of who's of the show, everyone who's not on Ghorman and not Cassian or Bix, because we have Mon Mothma, we got Perrin, we got Luthen, of course, we got his assistant, whose name I forgot, but she's getting a lot of great moments so far in the season. We also have Director Krennic of all people, we have Luthen's contacting the ISB, a bunch of stuff going on, all converging, and the listening device is removed. I think Luthen's also feeling better because he's starting to tell jokes. He joked that they should have taken Krennic out while they were at the party. That would have probably saved a lot of effort and definitely affected how Rogue One would have gone. And during all this, Bix and Cassian aren't doing too much except for one thing. Earlier in the episode, Luthen's contacting another person. They were informed by the director and the ISB that they're going to be basically providing security for a project that basically the person who tortured Bix, that project's going to go beyond the ISB into the entire Imperial military. And then later on, well, we don't know who he told, but I can definitely say this. Bix and Cassian found out because Bix got her revenge. Hopefully it's cathartic for her, but I don't really see that as her getting her revenge for what that doctor put her through way back in Season 1. Rather, I see it as her finally being able to face her demons and hopefully be able to get into a mental state where they will still always be there, where they will no longer be controlling her life. Because she subjects him to the same torture that he subjected her to, and who knows how many other victims that we have not yet seen on screen and probably will never see told in the Star Wars story, just implied. And then they also decide to, I think, blow up the office as well, or at least some Imperial office. They didn't get to do, Cassian and Bix did not get to do much in this episode except for at that very end. But just like way back 3 episodes ago, you have the different quote-unquote actions being as the episode ends, being told back to each other, reinforcing them and having the music beats all come together. It's just really well put together. But that's what I got to say here, so stay tuned for my full review coming out later today. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger, I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2 Episodes 4, 5, and 6. Episode 4 is Have You Ever Been to Ghorman? Episode 5 is I Have Friends Everywhere, and Episode 6 is What a Festive Evening. So, this is the second arc of the show so far, and it continues on. We're getting into the Ghorman stuff. Cyril has been tasked basically by the Empire, by Jedha, to go to Ghorman, heading the Imperial Bureau of Standards Division office there in order to, get in contact with the Ghorman Front, because they want to, try to provoke the Ghorman Front into doing something so that way they can justify, harsher realities, harsher appraisals on Ghorman because of everything they want to do and the minerals they want to extract from Ghorman. And that stuff eventually comes together with everything going on with Cassian, Lucen, and also we got Cinta and Vel back as well. Because Lucen wants to see what they're all about because they're making a little more noise, nothing violent yet. And so he sends Cassian to investigate it, and basically Cassian says like, yeah, they don't know what they're doing. And he thinks it would be a waste of time to go there while Ventus and Cinta and Vel were already sent in. Lucen already clearly had planned that to basically advise them on what to do and how to actually accomplish a heist against the Empire. And the heist does go on in the final episode along the same time while Lucen's assistant, whose name is escaping my brain, is using Lucen's asset in the ISB to block other people from seeing her remove a listening device that they had put in a piece of artwork that was put in, I forget his name, but the father of the groom who married Mom Monster's daughter. By the way, Mom Monster was in the room while our listening device was being removed, as well as Olsen Krennic and a bunch of other people as well. So that was just like a crazy thing going on there. Like, how did that go on? But the device gets removed, and Lucen's feeling a little better because you can tell throughout these past 3 episodes, Lucen was getting more and more agitated. The stress is clearly getting to him, but removing that listening device and then being able to crack a joke afterwards, he seems to be getting a little better. That joke, I mean, if they had actually acted on that joke before he told the joke, Rogue One would have been gone very differently if Krennic was in the picture. There's several other things as well going on. Cassian's actually kind of a minor player in these 3 episodes. His main role, like I said, was to investigate the Ghorman front, see what they're all about, and report back to Lucen. But a bigger part of his story, along with Bix's story, is a little bit about the relationship, but more about helping Bix overcome her demons, because the torture that she suffered by the hands of that ISB doctor and back in season 1 have not left her. It has left lasting scars. It's making her not sleep well and all that, making her turn to some kind of sleep aid that won't help her in the long run. Also, they're getting, honestly, everyone's also starting to get mad at Lucen. Bix not as much as Cassian, but Cassian is definitely mad that Lucen spoke to Bix and didn't tell him, and basically because he thinks Lucen's overworking her, and yeah, kind of in her mental state, she probably is being overworked a bit. But also, But also, Vel and Cinta are getting frustrated at Lucen as well for kind of using them. Lucen's making enemies among his allies. And that probably includes Saw Gerrera, because he's going crazy, stating Rhydonium as not to be used as a fuel or anything like that, but as a substance. And Wilhelm, getting him involved in that, that's not going to go well. It's just not. And now, honestly, I totally understand why the rest of the Rebel Alliance, one has let Lucen probably fade into the echoes of history, and why they'll distance themselves from Saw later on in the timeline, because Saw is a bit crazy. And the death of his sister way back in the Clone Wars is still affecting him deeply as well, because he mentions her elusively, but unless you know what he's talking about, you might think he's just crazy, and he is just crazy, but he's crazy with being crazy at the same time. Does that make sense? Because it barely does, because, And, clearly that, though, he wasn't doing that to hurt the Empire. He was doing that for really personal reasons. But, of course, that's not all that's going on. Why would that be all that's going on? Because everything comes to a head. Honestly, my small reviews are blending together, but Cinta does not survive helping the Ghormans heist, because while they told the Ghormans only Vel and Cinta will carry blasters, one of them still carried the blaster and fired it, not knowing what to do, and accidentally shot Cinta. And, Vel's taking it way better than so they had started that last episode, rekindling their relationship, but then the incident happens during the heist. And yeah, and she's holding it together, but barely. She kind of lays it off on that Ghorman front member who clearly is regretting his actions. But at the same time, it's like, when you're in that line of work, you got to, be prepared not to make mistakes. And because with the Empire having Cyril there, Cyril's spying on what's going on. So he hears the shot going on, and he doesn't know what happened, but the fact that a shot was fired, that is going to go right into the Empire's hands, which is exactly what they wanted. The Empire wanted the Ghorman Front rebels to do something, and they wanted a mistake to be made, and the mistake was made. Cassian was right in many regards. The Ghormans were not ready for this. But Lucien is an accelerationist. He wanted something to happen. He wants to provoke the Empire. And in the long run, he's actually kind of right. I'm not a big fan of accelerationism, but in the way the Star Wars is telling the story of the Rebel Alliance fighting the tyranny and authoritarianism of the Empire, accelerationism is valid within the context of the story. And if you can achieve goals without being an accelerationist, you should. And I don't believe accelerationists are a valid form of ideology. I feel like that causes more harm than good. But Star Wars, this time frame in Star Wars specifically, is set in a time period where things are already bad. You can't make things much worse. And that's like the only time I could see potentially that being a valid interpretation, but I still personally am not a big fan of accelerationism. But that's getting outside the context of Andor. But is it really? Because Lucien has since season 1 always been described as an accelerationist. But the main thing I want to talk about, actually the two main things left to talk about, is the ending. So the main ending of there's the ending where, like in the first 3 episodes, they have all the plot lines, basically the final action going on the same time, but not, because the culmination of Cassian and Bix's story in these 3 episodes is separate. So you have Lucien's assistant disarming or removing the listening device while the heist is going on and cutting back and forth there. Saul's stuff was finished in the last episode, doesn't really play a role here. So that goes on, but at the same time, once that's done, we get to see what Cassian and Bix were up to, which involved breaking into an Imperial facility. That ISB doctor from season 1 gets Bix strapping him to his own torture device and making him bear his own torture before she leaves the building, dispatching an Imperial guard, which, by the way, that was causing her issues way back at the start of these 3 episodes, where Cassian had to dispatch an Imperial Army trooper because he saw what was going on. And that could have compromised their mission. So, and then they detonate an explosive, killing the doctor, I guess. As shown with Bix, you can definitely somewhat recover from the torture, though the lasting trauma lasts. And while you could read that scene as Bix taking her revenge, given how they've presented this a lot as her demons, this is more her confronting her demons, confronting them. And once they're confronted, they're going to be easier to not necessarily forget about, but move past, but deal with, to live with, without those demons controlling Bix's life. And I think once that happens, Cassian, lighten up a little bit too. So, really great ending and a good cathartic moment for Bix to really let her confront her demons and confronting the source of her demons specifically. Now, is there more to talk about? Oh, definitely. Small things here and there, such as the Ghormans are given a French accent. I don't know how close the language is to actual French. I don't know enough words in French. I can say bonjour, au revoir, I can count, but anything major, no. Yeah, not that knowledgeable. But giving the Ghorman that French connection, they did the same thing with the Twi'leks as well. But that makes it very easy, I think, to connect them to World War II and the French resistance, the French partisans, and also the French or was it that Spanish? Yeah, no, I think both of them had resistance groups called Maquis back in World War II. But I think that's fitting because Ghormans are known for their fabric, their silk, which comes from spiders. And while that silk is normally historically more associated with China than France, fashion is associated with France, and so that's a good connection to draw on. But also, by connecting them to French and French culture, with the use of the accent, the same thing as they did with Twi'leks, we can connect them to a group that is well known for resisting authoritarianism, for standing up for the rights. There's a reason why the French Revolution is such a big deal in history. Well, even in U.S. history classes, the French Revolution is mentioned in more than just passing. We probably know more about the French Revolution from U.S. history classes than we do the Glorious Revolution in the U.K. and everything with that and the lead up to that. Did I say UK when I meant US earlier? That doesn't matter too much. But it does matter, but not for the context of this discussion, where that association to the French with resistance, with rebellion, with overthrowing tyranny is, I think, a very deliberate choice by Tony Gilroy and everyone else involved in Star Wars Andor Season 2. It helps create a sense that we can relate to, a sense that helps confirm, that helps establish something without spelling something outright. Because when you spell something outright, you might be able to lose some nuance. You maybe even fail to convey something, but using things like music, which Andor has done a phenomenal job, and accents, you can start conveying stuff. They give Saw a very whispery, raspy voice, and that conveys that he's maybe not all there. That conveys something that them just saying it outright would not have been able to. And the Ghorman French-inspired accent does that as well. So if there's more we want to say, the comment section is open down below, so let's keep the discussion going on there. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Episode 7, 8, and 9. Episode 7, Messenger. Episode 8, Who Are You? And Episode 9, Welcome to the Rebellion. So we're going to talk about each individual episode, and then I'm going to talk about all three together, so stay tuned. Welcome to the Jedha Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and I'm continuing my reviews of Star Wars Andor Season 2 with Episode 7, Messenger. So, another year has passed, the Empire is tightening its grip on Ghorman, but the Ghorman front is also getting more bold in its opposition to the Empire. Not are they just doing peaceful stuff, they're doing more violent stuff, more attacks and that. The Empire is obviously playing up more the attack angle, because they're trying to make the Ghormans look bad because of their agenda, because they want to strip mine the planet and they need to get the people out of the way. And they still somewhat care about public perception, so they're not just going to go in right away. The Senate is still around after all. We are reminded of that because Mon Mothma, she's going into the Senate for some kind of meeting, briefly speaks with the Ghorman senator who thanks her for her courage in that and reminds her to keep herself safe. And I think, knowing what we know from Star Wars Rebels, we're getting to the point where Mon Mothma will take a stand where her only way to stay safe is to fully commit to the rebellion and run away from Coruscant, for lack of a better description. But other stuff is going on. For example, Dedra tells Cyril to pack his bags and leave. She knows the crackdown is coming, and you can tell she is truly, I think, killing for Cyril. Whether it started as manipulation originally or not, I think she has developed actual feelings for him, and he clearly has actual feelings for her. But on her end, initially I was thinking mostly manipulation going on and putting up her front, but I'm thinking that is changing for her, and hence why, with she knowing the crackdown is coming, she's trying to get him out of the way so he will hopefully stay safe. That's at least how I interpret that scene. Meanwhile, Cassian and Bix, they're on Yavin. We get to see a little bit of the Yavin base. It's growing. We get to see where the people are actually sleeping and all that. Cassian and Bix seem to have a nice little hut in the jungle. Seems like a pretty pleasant life. Except for Cassian has a blaster burn that's not healing that well. And Bix takes him to a Force hero who definitely senses more in Cassian, that he's like a special role in the rebellion in a sense. There's a lot of cryptic stuff going on, but definitely there's some interesting stuff there. And during all this too, Ghorman came back, so it seems like he separated from Saw and is working with Lucen again, because a year has passed. So Lucen is still around, and people are happy to be away from him. Both Bix and Vel are happy not to be taking orders from Lucen anymore. Seems like Cassian as well, but reconnecting with him, he's going to come back to Ghorman for one probably final mission for Lucen. And that probably will be inciting the Imperials to do the Ghorman massacre. I think it's going to be really interesting how it develops in the next 2 episodes. There's a lot more to discuss, so the comment section is down below. Star Wars Andor, Episode 8, Who Are You? Broke me. I've never felt such feelings after watching any work of fiction. I'm John Barry 555, this is the Jedha Ranger, and we need to talk about that episode. This episode had something to say. It put us in the Ghorman massacre. It didn't tell us about it, it put us in it. The closest I've ever felt to what I felt after this is when I watch history stuff, especially recreations of historic events, including tragedies. Band of Brothers, Why We Fight, is one of those examples. But with history, it's in the past. There's a sense of fait accompli about it. It's done. There's nothing you can do. You can only reflect on and learn from it. You can feel saddened by it. You can feel sorrow about it. But you don't often feel in it. And that's something I think a lot of people who do documentaries and even historical dramatization sometimes forget. They forget how to put you, the audience, in the event for feeling. Now granted, documentaries are often trying to be objective, so they hope the events speak for themselves. But historical dramas, on the other hand, they're set in the past, they're set during a historical event, and they're supposed to get you to feel something. They're supposed to be a dramatization. They are supposed to take more artistic license in a documentary. But Tony Gilroy and the rest of the creative team behind Star Wars Andor did that for a piece of fiction. They put you in a piece of fiction the way I feel like a lot of historical dramatizations fail to do. Perhaps it's because, especially first time, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what characters are going to make it out alive or not. And they worked that into the story. They made you feel like you were there on Ghorman with Cassian, with Cyril, with Ghorman, with all the members of the Ghorman Front. They made you feel there. They made you care about the characters. And it is so much better for that. Don't know if I'll ever be able to rewatch the episode, but they did such a superb job in the episode. They showed the Empire inciting a rebellion, inciting a riot to justify a crackdown, to justify oppression. But as we know from Ferrix, as we know from Rebels, they will lose control of that situation. Tyrants, whenever they try to incite an incident to justify oppression, will lose control of the situation. Tyrants, respect the rule of law, respect constitutional order. That is how you truly stay in power, by not provoking the people. That is a very radical message to say, but that is the message that Star Wars Andor, Who Are You, are giving to us. Plus, they made me care about Cyril's mother, actually feel sympathy for her. How? It showed us she does love her son in an overbearing way, but deep down, and same thing with Jedha. She's, I think, actually grown fond of Cyril, and losing Cyril in the riot, I think will affect her. Now, will she double down? It's a different story. We gotta see that all in the next episode, but this episode had something to say. It made us feel something, and it accomplished that goal. There's more I can talk about. I could talk about each individual character, how stuff, but the parallel to Ferrix is spot on. The people gather to the memorial, even though it's a trap. People recognized it was a trap, but they still did it anyhow because, yes, it may have been the tactically maybe not sound thing, but it was probably the morally right thing to take the stand in that moment. And as we know from other stories, this incident helped spark and galvanize the rebellion against the Empire and against Imperial tyranny as a whole. From an internal universe story, that stuff works perfectly. It feeds into it. You got the Ghormans also trying to relay their message, what actually happened out to the world, so that way the Empire is not dictating the narrative. We know Mon Mothma will take a stand. She'll probably rely on those transmissions from Ghorman. I had hoped Cassian would capture Cyril, because there was a moment where Cyril was like overwhelmed, and you might think like, he's saying, this is not what I stood up for. But seeing Cassian in the crowd, that brought him back to square one. He once again became that pre-Mormolana cop who was trying to capture a thief, a person, a murderer. He went back to square one. Any potential chance he had at redemption was gone. He regressed back to who he was way back in episode 1. And that's why Cyril has always been an antagonist, always been a villain. Villains and antagonists generally do not learn. They generally do not grow. They often will double down. They often will reject character growth. I'm interested in seeing how this event will change Jedha, because she's clearly overwhelmed by this. She had grown fond of Cyril despite the fact I'm pretty sure the relationship began as manipulation, had very toxic on both sides. But it was kind of like they were toxic to each other, and somehow that made it healthy for themselves and was starting to bring out the better part in each other. But Cyril regressed. Will Jedha regress? She's set up as a villain. Will she have an Agent Callus moment? I don't know. Remember, we got Aldhani too, who's we didn't see him at all in this episode because he's back on Coruscant, being Lucian's spy, I'm sure. He might see Jedha is now struggling and start poking at her, trying to, may either get her to slip up with something or even defect. I could see that. There's a lot of interesting stuff because we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. This episode has a lot of interesting stuff that can go forward, but the most important thing is it showed us the Ghorman massacre. It made us in the audience feel something. And that, I think, was deliberate. We saw the inciting incident that we needed from the big Mon Mothma moment coming in the next episode, and it made us, the audience, feel something and hopefully take something away from it. That's what I got to say. What do you have to say? The comment section is down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Episode 9, Welcome to the Rebellion. So, a lot happens in this episode. It's basically dealing with two parts: the political fallout from the Ghorman massacre and Mon Mothma's speech, and also Cassian and basically his role in the rebellion. Those are the two main parts, and the title is so fitting. Mon Mothma, she gives her speech. The speech that we knew was coming, the speech that we saw a brief clip of the Star Wars Rebels. Cassian helps her get out of the Senate. And good thing he was there, because there was an ISB plant in the team that was going to extract Mon Mothma from the Senate. I do think the other members would have definitely tried to stop the ISB plant, but having an extra person there definitely did help. And obviously, Cassian is not the one who brings Mothma to Yavin. We know from Star Wars Rebels that Skull Squadron and Phoenix that do the bulk of that work. But it makes sense to spread out the thing, though. Cassian got back to Yavin with a lot less difficulty than Mon Mothma did. Perhaps Mon Mothma should have hitched the ride, but what happened in Star Wars Rebels is definitely probably a little bit better for propaganda. And actually, I do appreciate how they didn't repeat that, just alluded that that's how it's going to go. So I kind of wish they had made a mention to Phoenix. So, oh well, that's my only complaint about that. But, so Mon Mothma, she's now in the Wars of the Rebellion properly, but we probably won't see that until the last 3 episodes. But Cassian, he's tired. He's ready to basically retire from the rebellion, live a life with Bix. Of course, Bix sees that he's needed the rebellion, so she decides for them to choose the rebellion. So she hops outside on transport, probably to help another rebel base or another rebel cell somewhere. And so that way Cassian has to commit to the rebellion. That he, basically the choice is taken away from him, because based off of the experience with the Force Healer from the previous episode, Bix has determined that the rebellion needs Cassian, that once they win, once they defeat the Empire, then they can have their required life together. So, about that, we know what's going to happen in Rogue One. But this was, I think, really good follow-up. There's a lot of smaller things I can further discuss, but seeing basically a little bit of the political intrigue, the ISB trying to stop Mon Mothma from her speech, but failing. Bail Organa getting things ready for Mon Mothma in the Senate, and you can tell they used the chain of allies to get Mon Mothma's speech going in a way that the Empire can't, get everyone else for. And then the Empire tries to get Mon Mothma, but she gets out, as I said earlier. There's more to discuss, so the comment section is down below. So now that we talked about each individual episode, let's take a look at the episodes as a whole, how they all fit together. So, Episode 7, Messenger, is supposed to be ramping up the tension for us, getting us reconnected with what's going on, getting us back in, knowing that things are coming to a head. Episode 8 is supposed to be the inciting incident, the incident that catches everyone's attention, and Episode 9 is supposed to be the fallout from said incident, which they do so superbly. They all feed into each other, all build off of each other. Now, some character plots may be dropped for the sake of story. We don't need to see what happened to Jedha after the Ghorman massacre. That's not important to the story. Yes, we want to know, and we'll probably see the fallout from that on her end in the terms of the next 3 episodes. But in here, all we need to know from Episode 8 was that this was not it did not go the way she was expecting, mainly because of Cyril. So we know that. That's all we needed to know. But when it came to Welcome to the Rebellion, what mattered was seeing Mon Mothma take the stand and seeing her get to safety. That's all we needed to know. And because of Star Wars Rebels, we don't even need to see her get to Yavin. We know she'll get to Yavin. So we do not need to see that. We just need to be told that we are shown that Cassian gets her out of the Senate safely, and then we are told, and Ghost Squadron, plus Phoenix Cell as well, will be, even though they're not mentioned directly, will be the ones that actually get her to Yavin. That's what we needed to see. And this does it well. Tony Gilroy, the actors, Dina Luga, and everyone else involved with Star Wars Andor know how to tell a story, and they're doing a really, really, really good job at it and exceeding very well. They're also making a story that has not only something to say, but makes you feel stuff. I already addressed that when I talked about Episode 8, but no work of fiction has made me feel in the way that it had. Probably something to do with how well they just constructed the story, that they were able to invoke those emotions in me. I'm sure I'm not the only one as well. And there's many small things, like I forgot to mention that I'm pretty sure we're going to get K2SO now, because at the end of the Ghorman massacre, Cassian captures thanks to Ghorman, captures and disables a KX droid, and at the end of Welcome to the Rebellion, they are reactivating, and he seems like quite a pleasant chap. I know many of us had the theory that perhaps K2SO has a bit of B2's programming, and that still would be nice, because I still want to know what happened to B2. Is he still on the farming plane? Is he safe? Tell me he is safe. But the point being is this Welcome to the Rebellion. It's not just welcoming Mon Mothma into the Rebellion, but it's welcoming Cassian into the Rebellion proper, even though he's the one who gives that line to Mon Mothma. But Bix, by going on her own to probably serve the Rebellion in a different fashion, away from Cassian, is what allows Cassian to stay in the Rebellion and truly become a part of the Rebellion in a way he wasn't before. They've done a great job with all this. They've weaved the story fantastically, and I really can't wait to see where the next episodes go. Let's keep the discussion going on in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of the last 3 episodes of Star Wars Andor. Episode 10, Make It Stop. Episode 11, Who Else Knows? And Episode 12, Jedha, Kyber, Erso. So these are the final 3 episodes, and they're designed to set up the events of Rogue One. I have timestamps below for each individual episode, and then we're going to have a conclusion at the very end. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Episode 14, Make It Stop. So this is primarily a Lucen and Kaylee episode. Kaylee, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is Lucen's assistant, and we get to learn how they meet and their backstories through flashbacks in this episode that are interspaced with the main action of the episode, because the episode basically opens up with Lonnie informing Lucen of basically the Death Star, though he doesn't quite know that yet, but knows that the Empire's energy project is actually a front for a secret weapon that Krennic is making, and we know that to be the Death Star. And Lucen kills Lonnie to, keep loose ends from falling apart. He could have taken Lonnie to a safe house and then to Yavin, and I'm sure Lonnie would have been a great asset for the rebellion, but no, Lucen couldn't do that. He needs to get out of his secret mindset. That's not quite the rebellion anymore. Secrecy, yes, but not as secret as it used to be. But anyhow, then Lucen is confronted in his shop by Jedha. Him and Kaylee had already basically planned to shut the operation down, destroy the evidence, because thanks to Lonnie, they knew Jedha was onto them and planning a raid. And Lucen has this great line where he says that there's basically only 2 suspect items in the shop. He's implying that's about some of the artifacts he has on display in his gallery, and he picks up a knife as a demonstration. But he's really talking about himself and Jedha. That is just great storytelling there from the team. And to prevent himself from being tortured and reveal the information, he stabs himself with that knife. Now, Jedha does try to save him because she wants to interrogate him and all that. But that doesn't go quite well because Kaylee decides to infiltrate the hospital and take Lucen off of life support to ensure that he dies, which is something I'm sure they discussed. But through the flashbacks, we do reveal that, while yes, they have a very strong professional relationship, there is also a little bit of a father-daughter relationship going there. And you can see that because Kaylee teared up when she took Lucen off of life support. So many great scenes there, so much more to discuss, such as Jedha basically getting in trouble for the ISP for basically being too impatient conducting the raid a little sooner. But good thing she did in a way, because I'm sure Lucen had a lot more plans to destroy things in his shop than he got around to because of her going in early. But the Empire, I have a feeling, is going to punish her for not following their timetable because she's no longer useful to them. But those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Episode 11, Who Else Knows? So, things are picking up. Kaylee sends a message to Cassian basically saying, hey, got important information, come quick, and using an older code that's also an emergency code as well. Now, Cassian brings K2SO, who we can see he has some sass, just like we know him. And he also brings Meshi as well. They go to Coruscant to extract Lucen and Kaylee, or at least hear what they have to say, not knowing that Lucen is dead. Meanwhile, the Empire is trying to find Kaylee because, well, she likely knows what Lucen knows and they want to interrogate her. So everything's closing in, and I have to say, it is just a great episode with the suspense taking, especially at the very end, the Imperial's tracking beacon as they're trying to trace in on the source of Kaylee's communication, because Lucen didn't get a chance to destroy everything, they were able to intercept the transmission and they have a trace. And the tracing equipment has this beep and it's getting louder and louder near the end as the ISB is closing in on Kaylee and Cassian and Meshi because they're there now. Meanwhile, K2SO, he's guarding their ship, but he notices the comms have been cut and he goes to take out the Empire. And I just love how when the ISB TAC team people ask him, are you one of ours? He says no, knocks him off the bridge. And granted, things are not going well for anyone right now. It's tense, it's exciting, and also Yavin, they're mad at Cassian for going on his own once again, and they confine Wilhelm to his quarters because he helped them with that. But it's a good thing that Cassian is going on his own basically because the rebels need this information badly. And there's also some tension about, Kaylee does not expect Yavin to basically listen to her and wants Cassian to relay the information, but it might be better if both of them go and plus, she could probably be a pretty good use in the rebellion. Knows a fair bit about communication, could be quite beneficial. There's more to go on. Jedha, despite basically being in trouble and looking like her career is in the gutters, she does give one of her fellow ISB officers some advice that actually does help them narrow it down. So that shows that even once she's in a situation where she should be looking out for herself truly first and foremost, she is still helping the Empire. But that's what I got to say. I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my review of the 12th and final episode of Star Wars Andor Season 2. Jedha, Kyber, Erso. So this episode is leading us directly into Rogue One, and they do a phenomenal job at it. But more than that, it's also about trusting Lucen's intel, trusting that what he got out of the ISB is not false, and that his sacrifice essentially wasn't in vain. And due to other things going on, the rebels decide, you know what, we probably should trust the intel. There's enough going on, other weird stuff, that if it is a trap, it's a darn good trap, and we should though take it seriously anyhow, take this intel seriously, because they know Saw's on Jedha, and that's one of the things from Lucen's intel. There's a destroyer above Jedha. There's a contact in Saw's group that will only speak to Cassian. That's how Cassian gets released from being grounded, and then he's sent to the Rigging Kafrene to get that intel. And we know where that leads to there. But there's more going on as well. We see the beginning of the squabbling of the Rebel High Command and leadership and all that we see again in Rogue One. And that includes a few of the plays we saw in Rogue One as well, showing that they're not quite united yet, and this intel, because there's going to be another meeting, and we know that meeting that they mentioned is actually the meeting in Rogue One. Such good connections there. But we also get to see where all our characters ended up. We know Cassian, he's getting ready to head on to the Rigging Kafrene and the events of Rogue One. Meshi and plus several of the others that we later see in Rogue One on Scarif helping Cassian extract the intel on the Death Star, the actual intel that they need to destroy it. We see him training with them in the jungle, the forests of Yavin. We get to see Will Major Pargast. We get to see him. He's listening to Namek's manifesto, and I think it might be speaking to him. Everything that's going on, he's either overwhelmed with it and he takes his own life, or he decides to wake up and that's his act of defiance, a small little bit. But I don't think it was a coincidence that he was listening to Namek's manifesto when he made that decision. Then we also get on top of all of that too, we see what happens with Jedha. Well, she's in a prison just like on Narkina 5. She lost everything and she breaks down sobbing because of it. She lost everything. But we also get to see what happens with Bix. There's a scene where Vel employs Cassian to reconnect with Bix, and he says to do it after, but we know he won't. But we see what's going on with Bix. She's living on the planet that we saw at the very beginning in Season 1 where Bix, Brasso, Willem, and Cassian and B2 were living. B2 is still there playing with the other droids. But Bix, she's taking care of an infant. I'm pretty sure that's Bix and Cassian's child that will never get to see their father. And that's just tragic. But I think Vel knows that and wanted Cassian to try to reconnect, try to learn that he has a child. And we know tragedy that won't connect. It's tear-jerking, really. There's so much there. I'm sure I missed some stuff, but the pieces are in place for Rogue One. You can watch Star Wars Andor, Star Wars Rogue One and Star Wars Story, I should say, and A New Hope all together, and you have one cohesive narrative. There might be a bit of a jump to like, okay, why are we following this Luke Skywalker character? How does he fit into all this? And that's the only rapid jump going on there, but it is a cohesive narrative, and it all flows into each other and does support each other. Except for the real jump, but it does essentially work. Though, I gotta say, I was looking in the background, I was hoping I could see a reference to Star Wars Rebels somehow. I was hoping for it. I may just not have been observant enough. But the point I'm making here is that this episode did a phenomenal job at closing the season up and laying the groundwork for the next story. It did what a prequel needs to do. It showed us what we needed to know for the next story, while also leading into it in a what I believe to be a satisfying way. So that's where I'm going to end my review of Star Wars Andor Season 2, Episode 12. So now that we took a look at Star Wars Andor Season 2 in its pieces, let's take a look at it as a whole unit, because that's what the show is doing. A whole unit, a whole story that, despite the time jumps between each block of episodes, is telling one consistent story. Season 1 was much more, in my opinion, focused on Cassian and getting him introduced into the rebellion and willing to rebel. All about him waking up and taking action. And Season 2, he's taking action. It's all about him staying in that action and the events that he's a part of, contributing to not only the formation of the rebellion, but also helping us lead into the events in Rogue One and the events surrounding it. There are events that go on that truly have nothing to do directly with Cassian, but are important either for understanding the characters in his life, the characters that are influencing him, impacting him, or are important for setting up the events of Rogue One. They all feed into each other. Andor Season 2 and Andor Season 1 as well have been a masterpiece of storytelling. And it does, like I said earlier, perfectly lead into Rogue One. In fact, I want to rewatch Rogue One and make a new review. Rogue One was the very first Star Wars movie I ever reviewed for this channel, way back, 2016 I believe? It's been quite some time, and it deserves for me to rewatch and take a new look, especially in the context of everything that we have seen in Star Wars Andor. But this review is specifically focusing on Season 2. There's a lot of small moments here and there, small moments of storytelling techniques that I never got to mention because there was just so much going on, so much important stuff that the small stuff I've been unable to comment on and impart my opinion, my judgment, my reaction to them, whatever adjective we want to use to describe all that. Star Wars Andor Season 2 told a great story and it led in perfectly. I can't stress that enough. But those small moments that I failed to mention are what makes this show so good. The team had an immaculate attention to detail. They accomplished so much stuff that to break down everything will take a lot longer than I'm giving myself for this video. But in summary, pay attention to those small details. Small things here and there. These are not like Easter eggs, though they do have a few things like that. What these small things are. These are things that enrich the story, that contribute to a sense of realism, to help contribute to a sense of, well, the suspension of disbelief. The small things that bring you into the story, that make the story feel real and timeless. Yes, the story may be set in a galaxy far, far away, but it calls upon history, it calls upon current events, it calls upon so much stuff that you can't help but feel that they are telling a real story. And even in the small scenes where they do bring in the Force, it feels like very much the same way where how sometimes it feels very much the same as when you're watching a World War II dramatization and the chaplain says, "God bless you," or something like that. Very small. Feels like it's a part of the world the way normal people would interact with it rather than the people who do sense the Force, who do have that stronger connection than the average person. They made the world feel real. And by doing that, they've made the story so much better for it. Star Wars Andor is probably the best piece of Star Wars media ever created. Some of the books are probably the only times you can actually rival the story, the world building, the attention to detail. Andor achieved greatness, in my opinion. Krennic may have complained in Rogue One that they were this close to greatness, but here is true greatness. But those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear yours in the comment section down below. So now that we took a look at each individual episode, arc, and season, let's take a look at Star Wars Andor as a whole. More than anything, Star Wars Andor has continued the themes expressed in the original Star Wars trilogy, and in the prequel trilogy, and in Star Wars The Clone Wars, in Star Wars Rebels, in Star Wars Resistance, in Star Wars The Bad Batch, in the Star Wars Jedi games, in many books in Legends, even in the Star Wars sequels, despite their flaws, they all express the same themes. The current novel, same thing. But Star Wars Andor has done something that most of those have failed to do. Articulated in such a thought-provoking, engaging way. That's what Star Wars Andor has achieved. They've done it in a way that's not dumbed down, for lack of a better term. Because Star Wars, at its core, has often been made with a wide audience in mind involving children. And that's fine. You can do that. But we can also have more thought-provoking. We can have the more mature without going, for lack of a better term, dark, going R-rated. And that's what Star Wars Andor has done for us. It's created that mature itch that many Star Wars fans have been wanting, in my judgment, my estimation, without going, R-rated, without having to resort to, to curse words. And, okay, Star Wars has its own favorite curse words, but you know what I mean. Crude, crass, that kind of curse words, without having to have explicit scenes, over-the-top gory violence. Andor has gotten that maturity without doing what I've been observing in some properties of what would be like, this is how we gotta make things more mature, by making things more childishly dark. Does that make sense? And it's not childish as in designed for children, but childish as in not giving adults or dudes thinking the only way they'll accept something mature would be if characters are swearing every 50 seconds and making crude, crass jokes. Star Wars Andor doesn't do it, and that's what makes it so good. That's what makes it mature in such a way, because its maturity does not come from jokes. It does not come from cursing. It does not come from explicit material. It comes from truly thought-provoking stuff about the nature of freedom, by the nature of tyranny, the nature of resisting tyranny and authoritarianism. That's what Star Wars Andor does. That's thought-provoking. A good hallmark of this is when we get to see the Ghorman massacre in Season 2 of Star Wars Rebels, with literally the episode that's all about the Ghorman massacre occurring, but it's also surrounding arc. I know many people online express that they had events just like that in their country. I've seen people say that this is scary, this is something I could see happening. I can see that happening in my own country now. And that's the scary thing, that's the thought-provoking thing, is by relying on history, because that is the stuff they have shown that people are drawing modern day parallels with current events. Yeah, Tony Gilroy, the team, they're great and all, but they're not clairvoyant, they're not psychics, they can't predict what's going to happen. But when you're a good student of history, you recognize trends, you recognize patterns. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. George Lucas once said, like poetry rhymes with, I believe, talking about some of his allegories. And that is correct. An allegory is a rhyme to history. And because it's rhyming with history, that means it's also going to rhyme with future history, i.e. current events. Current events are history as soon as they happen, but they've not been set in stone yet. They've not been made yet. But more than anything else, Star Wars Andor tells us something fundamental about the human experience, is that there will be people who will always be seeking for tyranny, seeking for order at the expense of justice, and all that. Those people will always exist. They will always be trying to cement their rule, to implement their will on other people. And they will sometimes be more successful, but sometimes they will not be. But it's also telling us that the human nature, the human need for independence, from freedom, whether that freedom is found in individuality or in community, will always be present and will always come around. Nemec's manifesto is very much the manifesto, the core ideology that Star Wars Andor is expressing. That's why it's, when we actually hear it in its full, have been at key moments. Near the end of Star Wars Andor Season 1 is the first time we truly hear it in its entirety. Not when Nemec is sharing it with Cassian the first time. No, when Cassian is listening to it and reflecting on it after the events of, I'm pretty sure, all of Season 1. And then we hear it once again at the end of Season 2. This time, Andor's not listening to it, but Major Pargas in Imperial. Now, many people have different interpretations of that scene, including myself. I'm conflicted on what I think is the right interpretation. And that's really good in Star Wars Andor. You can interpret it as major progress. He's listening to it and he's regretful that he failed to stop its spread, that essentially he failed his job as he would call himself, a healthcare provider, because he saw freedom, independence, liberty as diseases to be eradicated. But you could also read it as he's feeling like maybe his own sense of rebellion, whether he consciously realizes it or not, but him deciding not to probably get killed by the Emperor, but to kill himself, is an act of rebellion. He's not letting himself be the fall guy, for lack of a better term. And isn't that also an act of rebellion? Nemec does mention in his manifesto how the smallest act of resistance pushes the line forward. And a major figure in the ISB avoiding punishment is doing that in a sense. Now, that's one interpretation, but it is a valid interpretation, and I'm not sure which interpretation I like more. A remorseful one a remorseful major progress who thinks he's failed, or one who is somewhat being moved by the words, but just like Jedha and just like Zero, will never accept the meaning. I do think that's definitely the case, even though I think I might contradict myself earlier, but that's what these discussions, these engagements online have helped me better see other viewpoints, and sometimes that does tell me something like, hey, I missed something that I should have considered. But there is more. Of course there is more. This is Star Wars Andor. There's always more small details. And that being the contrast, the foils that our heroes and villains provide for us. The heroes learn from their mistakes. Cassian, he's a loner, but by the end, he's a part of a community, and then we see that going into Rogue One. But all our villains, well, they never realize it. Which makes sense, but what I'm getting at is they never find a sense of true belonging in the community. They're always in seeking of something, and they fail. Zero, well, he's been after Cassian, and any chance he had after his experience on Ghorman of turning around and realizing he was on the wrong side failed because he couldn't let go of the fact that Cassian was involved in his fall from grace, for like a bad term. He regressed. Jedha, same thing. There's a lot of complicated stuff by Jedha, but when you look at her entire arc, it's about this ISB person who's always seeking basically to follow the system at its core at whatever means necessary, but never truly in the position to get away with breaking the rules. That's her story. In Major Progress, another true believer in the system who also, when it comes to the end, he doesn't realize, or even if he does, he doesn't decide to make amends. He doesn't decide to try to leave things better. He doesn't do that for whatever reason. Because I do think the Nemec's words did speak to him, but how they spoke to him, that's the thing. And I do think it's more of like some subconscious stuff, that his inner desire for his own liberty, his own freedom, does cause him to realize the only way he can be truly free of the system is to leave the system forever. Perhaps, or I could be totally wrong, and that's the great thing about Star Wars Andor. But there's more. Of course there's more. This is Star Wars Andor. I said that once, I'll say that again. Another key thematic element of Star Wars Andor to discuss is that resisting tyranny is not an individual act. Andor, yeah, he was resisting the Empire his own way, but he wasn't getting anywhere until he met Lucid. Lucid introduced him to the Great Rebellion. And we saw that on Ferrix in Season 1. The community came together with Marvel Andor's funeral and resisted the Empire. They said no. And the Empire, in their haste to tighten down, they turned a peaceful assembly into a riot. Yes, Wilhelm had built a bomb and may have been planning on using it, but the Empire acting convinced him, made him use it for sure. Would he have behaved differently if the Empire had stayed peaceful and not provoked a greater reaction? I don't know, but provoking greater reaction is what the Empire does. The need for tyranny, as Nemec basically says, I'm paraphrasing here, is unnatural and therefore has to be tight, uncontrolling, and no tightening that causes people to respond radically to gain their freedom, to gain their liberties. And when you consider that, what we see on Ghorman makes perfect sense. The Empire is slowly tightening the noose, trying to purposely do what they did on Ferrix, but this time control the outcome. But as we know, they can't. Freedom will be spontaneous. It will go. And the Ghormans, well, they did their best to resist the Empire, but the Empire was a step ahead of them, but they still fought. It was a no-win scenario for them, but we know multiple Ghormans made their way off the planet and fought in the Great Rebel Alliance. William had clearly gotten close to one member of the Ghorman Front, and now she's working on Yavin with the Rebel Alliance. But we also know from the Rogue One visual dictionary that another member of the Ghorman Front who survived the Ghorman Massacre ended up fighting with Saw Gerrera's partisans. And that's, in a way, the heart that the Empire will try to stamp down. Tyranny will try to stamp down on freedoms, on liberties. But freedoms and liberties, well, maybe temporarily fight back, but it will eventually fight back. And sometimes things will be small. A great example is in Mon Mothma's speech to the Senate condemning the Ghorman Massacre and Emperor Palpatine directly. Her speech was not small, but a lot of small things occurred to allow her to make that speech. But basically, one of Bail's allies teed him up so he could tee Mon Mothma up. A chain of 3 people, maybe more, but at least 2 people plus Mon Mothma to actually get Mon Mothma to speak. Another chain as well, you could say, is those techs who closed the door to the transmission room because that's procedure. Why did they decide to follow procedures then? Did they know what Mon Mothma was going to do? Were they, in Bail's group and he said, hey, make sure you actually follow the rules this time? Was that a plan that Bail and his group and Mon Mothma's group in the Senate had for some time? They have these technicians, hey, make sure you don't actually close the door. We want them to think the door is open. They can cut off transmission at any time until it's too late. And these are valid, interesting questions about the story, but more importantly than anything, they are showing us that rebellions not just built on hope, which I love how they included that line, but also built on small acts, small, malicious, compliant acts of peaceful resistance that can, disrupt a authoritarian and tyrannical system. Could I talk about more? You certainly bet I can, because I have so much more to say about Star Wars Andor as a whole. But I think the thing I want to stress the most about Star Wars Andor is that it is something that Star Wars needs to do more of. We need more deep shows like this. Now, do they need to have the same production value as Star Wars Andor? No, because the production value isn't what made Andor great. No, it was the writing and the team behind it. And that's what all Star Wars needs. A good writing team and a good creative team. Actors, directors, production assistants, set designers, set dressers. All of them who are creative and passionate about the work. They don't have to be big fans of Star Wars. That's not what's needed. But passionate in the art and have something to say. Yes, you can have the fun, play with action figure styles that is definitely the Star Wars The Mandalorian. And we can have Star Wars Andor. They can coexist. But what's important is that there's the passion for the art in the creative team itself and minimum corporate meddling. Because corporate meddling is normally to put it bluntly, it's tyranny in some sense. Yes, I'm making that connection there, but corporate meddling stifles creative freedom, just like tyranny and authoritarianism stifles regular freedoms. And good shows come from minimum creative interference by corporations, by boards and execs. When they try to make a broadly appealing product, it often rings hollow and can be very much disliked by audiences because it's boring. But Star Wars Andor succeeds because it's not boring, because the creative team was able to be creative and express their ideas in interesting ways. Yes, we don't have to have everything to the same level of quality or the same level of self-production as Star Wars Andor, but what we do need is the same level of creative passion from the actors, writers, directors, production designers, production assistants, set dressers, and everyone else who's involved. Star Wars Andor was a team effort, and a big part of their story was the heroes are a community that were building themselves up, and the Empire was a community that was tearing itself apart with its own internal infighting. So that is where I want to end my review of Star Wars Andor Seasons 1 and 2. But I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below, because there is so much more interesting stuff that I failed to discuss that I believe is warranted a discussion. So the comment section is there. You can also hop over to my Discord server as well, and we can keep the discussion going there as well. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you always.